Okay, Chair, we're live.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your virtual attendance here this evening. This is the Extraordinary Planning Committee being held at 6 p.m. on the 19th of November 2020. Due to government guidance on social distancing and COVID-19 virus, the Planning Committee on the 19th of November will be held virtually, and arrangements have been made for the press and public to watch the meeting live via the Council's online webcast channel, and that's youtube.com user Thurrock Council. Okay, with that, we'll now go on to the agenda. First off is apologies for absence. Wendy, do we have any apologies for absence?
Chair, we've received no apologies, but Councillor Churchman and Councillor Potter was not required to attend this meeting as this item is deferred as part of the as part of the Council's constitution.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so outside those two councillors, that's the full attendance and all the members who voted on the last time this application come to committee. So it's a great news that we have everyone on board. With that, we'll go on to item 2, which is items of urgent business. I have not considered any items of urgent business this evening. That then takes us on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. I personally have no declarations of interest. If any other councillors do, please raise your hand. No? Okay, I can't see any hands raised there. All right, that then takes us on to receipt of any correspondence item.
Sorry, Chair, Councillor Lawrence had her hand raised.
Okay, okay, Councillor, please go ahead.
Hi, I did receive an email. I don't know if anyone else did. Hello? Hello, can you hear me? I did receive an email. I don't know if anyone else did. Did anyone else receive an email?
Yes, that was an email from Gary Coxall. I understand that was the agent. Apologies, I hadn't finished because we was on item 3 and no one raised their hand. I was reading out item 4, but yet to confirm, I have received an email who's the agent from Woodview, and I understand that email has been to and from the monitoring officer today. Obviously, the monitoring officer may be able to fill in any questions that you have, but obviously we could look into that on pages 5 to 32. But yes, I can confirm that we have received emails today from the agents on behalf of Woodview. But thank you very much for raising that. Is there any further declarations of correspondence? Thank you. No, okay, that's fantastic. All right then, so what we'll do now, we'll do item 5, which is the public address to the Planning Committee. And that now allows us to discuss the rest of the items on the agenda. Now, this is an extraordinary meeting we're having this evening. As you'll be aware, we're looking at item 6, which is a monitoring officer report on the decision of the Planning Committee in relation to the land adjacent to Woodview and Chadwell Road Grays. Application reference 19-01373.OUT, and that can be found on pages 5 to 32. Just as a reminder to anyone who has tuned in, there are elements of this agenda that's subject to legal privilege. So there may be a time during this debate that we have to go into a closed session. Far from ideal, not very common, but it does happen. But then at the same time, there's also a chance we don't get to that destination. So if the meeting is cut off to you, of course, the meeting will still be live. And of course, we will come back to you before we get to the resolution of item 6. And with that, if there are no further questions, I would like to welcome the monitoring officer, Ian Hunt, who will give his presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much, Chair, for the introduction. Just to say, yes, this is an unusual report to bring to a planning committee, and in that context, it's not one that I've undertaken lightly. It's only due to the significant concerns which have arisen that this report has been prepared. And in considering this, I've sought the advice of Michael Bedford QC, who's a specialist planning barrister, particularly in this area, and who is with us this evening. This report provides the committee with an opportunity to review and consider the implications of the advice before it. Formally, although I do have material concerns that the decision as reached would not be sustainable on challenge, the committee has the opportunity to resolve these issues without the need for a formal Section 5 report to full council. Members will be aware that where I have grounds for considering that the council is acting or likely to act in a way which is contrary to the law, I have a duty to make a report, particularly in situations where the issue can be remedied. And I believe that's the case tonight. I wish to make it clear up front that this report is not here because the committee decided to overturn the officer recommendation. And there have been suggestions that that's the case, but rather it is on the detail of the decision and what is, or importantly, is not included within the reasoning, which raises the concerns about the legality of the decision making. Members are well aware of their duty to give reasons for their decisions, both in common law, but also in line with the Council's constitution and member codes. This is not an individual exercise, but rather incumbent on the resolutions that members propose on and vote. So turning to this particular case and the resolutions proposed and voted on, the resolution gave a number of reasons for approval based on the weight that members were attaching to specific factors. However, the resolution does not adequately grapple with the significant tests set out in the National Planning Policy Framework or the local policies in respect of Greenbelt. This provides, in summary, that there must be very special circumstances which outweigh the protection of the Greenbelt. It's this omission which creates uncertainty and the scope for legal challenge. It's clear that the Greenbelt issues were dealt with in the officer report, and there was some consideration of this within the debate. Indeed, members may well have put their minds to the issue. However, the resolution as proposed and the final analysis did not clearly indicate that this factor was adequately assessed. For this reason alone, the matter needed clarification at this committee. It must be noted that given the decision is against the Council's adopted planning policy framework, as well as the National Planning Framework, the committee, in ascribing the weight it did to factors, did not provide much detail as to the reasoning for the weighting given. The committee is clearly the relevant decision maker in legal terms, and there is no move tonight to stop that being the case. When it ascribed its weight, it needs, however, to give relevant reasoning and explanation behind that, and that has to be seen in the context of the wider policy and legislative framework that exists. It's not open to members to ascribe weight without rational grounds and explanation. It's therefore incumbent on members to be able to provide this logic and explanation to support their decision making. These comments are not to be taken as a view that the committee cannot reach a conclusion which approves permission. However, if members are to do this lawfully, they must have the justification and reasoning. Clearly, the professional advice that has been provided is that the established policy framework does not support that overall conclusion, even when recognising the positive factors, although members may well have seen an email from the applicant, and indeed the applicant has said this for quite some time within their submissions to the committee in writing and in the application, that they would argue there are grounds for approval. Turning to that email from the applicant's barrister that was received this afternoon, the email does not fully address the distinction between the two reports that are before you. So this first report is purely looking at whether or not the decision that was reached is adequately reasoned and sustainable in legal terms, rather than the outcome as to whether or not it is appropriate to grant or refuse permission. That is reserved for the second report, should members accept the recommendation. in the first. Equally, they go on to suggest that there has to be a judicial review before the council can act to ensure its decision is sound, and that it's only a few officers that need to be explained to and resolved. That is, I would say, suggest a little bit narrow in terms of the way that it's put. And there is no basis for saying that a judicial review has to be undertaken before the committee can actually relook at what it's done and give a legally adequate set of reasons and justification. So before concluding my presentation, I just wish to be clear as to the effect of this first report and the next steps. If members approve the proposed resolution to rescind the decision, this does not determine the application in either way, nor should that vote be seen as a commentary on the direction that the previous resolution went. Yet this is not a decision as to whether or not this particular site should either have permission approved or refused at this point. It purely returns the substantive application to the committee to enable them to consider the matter afresh based on the material planning considerations. At the start of that consideration, the committee will have all options open to them, and they're not constrained by their earlier views. It's incumbent on the committee to review the material considerations and come to an appropriate planning balance which addresses the material considerations in terms of the factual application and the policy frameworks, both local and national. To assist members in balancing the material factors with Council's assistance, we've included a framework of 7 questions within the officer, this is the planning officer report, which are there to assist members in addressing the balance between these competing policy elements, which drive towards either approval or again a refusal. I hope, Chairman, that assists members, but I'm more than happy to take any questions or provide any further support.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ian. Before we do get to questions, did you want me to invite Michael forward for him to explain his findings, or did you want me to open up to questions to you now? Thank you.
Chair, if Michael feels he can add anything useful, I'm sure that would be of help to the committee.
Chair, thank you.
Okay, Michael, yep, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Just briefly, first of all, just by way of general context, as obviously you're all experienced members of the planning committee, and you will understand that there is a distinction between what the position is before a planning permission has, as it were, gone out of the door, and after a planning permission has gone out of the door. Where you make a decision on a planning application, until the planning permission has actually been issued, and I say gone out of the door, at least colloquially, to the applicant, the application is still, as it were, on your table. And if it appears that something has gone wrong in the process of getting to the decision, it's open to you to fix it. And there can be very good reasons why it's a good idea to fix it, because it avoids problems later down the line. And so, dealing with this issue of item 6 and the monitoring officer's report, all that you're being asked to deal with at this stage of the process is to make a decision on whether, if there is a problem with the decision made in July, ought you to try to fix that rather than leaving it for what might follow thereafter. And that is really what the monitoring officer's report is inviting you to do. It's explained to you that there are problems with that decision, And it's very important to distinguish between, as it were, what the nature of the decision and the reasons for the decision. And the issue that's been identified is that the problem is with the reasons for the decision. And that's not to, as it were, express a view one way or the other on what the ultimate decision ought to be. That's not a matter that is of concern in item 6 at all. So effectively, what's being said here is that there's a problem with the adequacy of the reasons for the decision, and the way to address that, or at least one way to address that, is to rescind the decision and to make it afresh. And that is what would be done if you move from item 6 to item 7. But I say all you're being asked to do at the moment is to consider, are there problems with the decision? It's the monitoring officer's view and my view that there are problems with that decision, and we are effectively inviting you to provide a way of fixing it. So that's really all that item 6 is about.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for your explanations there. Yes, I do agree with you that to an extent on item 6 this evening, there's no need to spend too long on it. It's either we rescind or we don't. So very shortly, I will open to questions and then we'll go into debate. Ian, just before I do, you did raise, obviously, some criticism on yourself that this might be potentially officers trying to overrule a particular decision that the planning committee made. My opinion is, given the decisions that have landed on your desk over the last few months, I don't think that is the case. Obviously, some would have considered Langdon Hills to be quite a controversial application that had 7 reasons for refusal, and of course you looked into that in some detail when you sent that off to the Secretary of State, as have you done with other decisions that have gone against officer recommendations. So I don't think that criticism is fair. I think you've been very open and honest in your concern, and that's all I wanted to add, because you do have a record of passing these officer recommendations that have not gone the way of officers through to the Secretary of State. So that's all I wanted to add. And with that, we'll now open to questions, and then we'll go to debate. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for either Ian or Michael? And if you do, please unmute and speak, because I can't see everyone on the camera.
It's Councillor Lawrence first, Chair.
Okay, please ask a question.
I would just like to ask, if we go ahead to rescind this, are we going to deal with this evening?
Chair, if I may, just to respond, the intention would be to immediately move after this item to item 7, which would effectively deal with the item straight away. So notionally, by the close of meeting, there will be a decision one way or t'other. That is, of course, assuming that members don't decide to do something like defer partway through item 7 for whatever reason that might be. Yeah.
Chair, if I may, on page 7, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so just to confirm. Go ahead, Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair, on page 7, there is a recommendation called option 1. I would so move option 1 so that we can progress the business, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Rice. So move option 1, which is to rescind the decision taken by Planning Committee on the 16th of July. I'm happy to second that. Well, just before we go to that, did anyone have anything else they wanted to say? Okay, I've not heard anyone speak. Is everyone, Wendy, are you happy to move to the vote on that?
Yes, Chair, there's no other hands raised, so we can move to the vote if everyone wishes to do so.
Okay, thank you. So we'll try and do this as best we can. So myself and Councillor Rice have recommended we move item 1. So that's both myself and Councillor Rice in favour. I'll go over to Councillor Fletcher. Do you approve, Councillor Fletcher?
Approved. Did you get that, Tom? Approved.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. Over to Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I approve.
Fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Salmons.
Yes, I approve.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Approve.
Okay, fantastic. And Councillor Shinnick.
Approve. Okay, did you hear that? Approve.
Was that approved, Councillor Shinnick?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Shinnick. Okay, so by my accounting there, it looks like that was unanimous across the committee. So item 6, the Monitoring Officer's report found on pages 5 to 32, that it has been, the decision is to rescind the decision and to reconsider the planning application 19/01373/0 and to determine the application setting out legally adequate reasons for decision to be sustainable. Okay, so with that then takes us on to item 7, which is 19/01373/OUT, land adjacent to Woodview and Chadwell Road, found on pages 33 to 104. Matthew, if you're with us, if you'd be so kind as to present the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If you bear with me just 1 second, I'll hopefully get the IT to connect and we can look at the PowerPoint. Yeah, bear with me. For whatever reason, I'm not getting up my desktop. So unless Wendy or somebody can guide me, it was working earlier.
Matt, if you go to share content on the top.
Yeah, I'm opening. Right, I've opened share tray. That's the one, the option I need, isn't it?
Yeah, share content. Yeah, and then choose the file that you want. It would appear on your screen.
Yeah, I'm getting browse, but it's not. I did print off the instructions as well earlier, but it's not going to
Chair,
plan.
did you want to adjourn for a few minutes? So we'll stop the stream for a few minutes whilst we get this up and running.
Actually, Chair, before you adjourn, may I just interject a second? Can you hear me?
Yes, Mike, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
And more than happy for the officers to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that okay, I'm not entirely sure what benefit we will get from completing the entire report, because when it comes down to it, it's the decision that needs to be discussed and the reasons for and against. I'm wondering if the key elements of the report that we need to hear again are the reasons for rejection, and in particular the reasons why it's, well, I mean, we know the reason why it's considered to be doing harm because it's building on the greenbelt, but the reasons for rejection, because this, I guess, would be the key point of discussion, unless people feel like they need to be reminded of what exactly the proposal includes. So more than happy to be disagreed with there. I'm just wondering whether we can, whether we need to go through the entire report again, which would be, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, no, yeah, but yeah, no, I mean, very fair comments. What we'll say, we'll see how Matt gets on. I think if there is any trouble there, obviously we can hear Matt. We do have the presentation in front of us. We would probably have to look at those speaker statements, but then yeah, we can quickly get into debate. It just depends on how many questions there are.
Oh, we're here. We've got it.
Sorry, Matt, I've put it on my screen.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm trying to give you control so you can flick about on the, well, you know, go. Ooh.
You might find it easier, Wendy, if you retain control and Matt just tells you when to click on. Just a thought for many years.
I don't mind doing that. If you want that, if you're okay with that, Matt, you just have to tell me to go next or.
Yeah, Wendy, thanks for doing that. That's fine. So that's probably the easiest.
Yeah, fantastic suggestion.
Rather than messing around.
We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Fantastic suggestion. Matt, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So I will run through a PowerPoint just for the benefit of members. You've seen this PowerPoint before, but it has been a little bit of time since June and July, so it might be useful. So next slide, please, Wendy.
Yeah.
So that's the site. This is an application which seeks outline planning permission with all matters reserved. So that's matters of access, appearance, layout, landscaping and scale. And the proposal is for 75 dwellings, and that would be a mix of 57 houses and 18 apartments. The site area you can see there, the triangular shape, is approximately 2.6 hectares in area. Next slide, please. And that's just a Google Maps image. So it's that rectangular shape center screen. It's an open piece of greenbelt. You have Woodview, the road on the northern boundary. So that's running diagonally top left to bottom right. And then Chadwell Road running horizontally across the middle of the screen there. And to sort of orientate members, Palmer's College, which is now USP College, is off there to the south. Next slide, please. Thank you, Wendy. So that's an extract from the core strategy proposals map. That just to make the point, the site is within the Metropolitan Greenbelt. So again, it's that triangular shape on the northern part of the screen there, with the college to the south. Next screen, please. Okay, that's just zoomed in on the site location plan. So as I've mentioned, all matters are reserved. However, under the regulations, a potential point of access does have to be suggested in an application, and the proposed point of access would be along that northern boundary, which is Woodview, towards the east. I'll show it on some pictures in a minute, but there is a potential point of access which has been shown on the plans. Next slide, please. So this is an indicative site layout. I've mentioned that all matters are reserved, including layout. So that is an indication of how the site could be developed, but that is not a detail for consideration tonight. That just shows a potential configuration of houses and apartments across the site, with the point of access that you could possibly make out again along that Woodview boundary, the northern boundary, towards the eastern end of the site. Next slide, please. We'll run through a series of photographs. You members of the committee may well recall these from the previous committees. So that's looking southeast across the site towards USP College, and obviously you can make it out as an open site. It's actually used for the grazing of cattle, so it is used for agricultural purposes, or it was in the summer when these particular pictures were taken. Next slide, please, Wendy. Again, so the site's off there to the right-hand side. That shows the relationship with Woodview. So that's looking along the long northwest to southeastern boundary of the site. Next slide, please, Wendy. Thank you. Again, that's a little bit further along Woodview, looking directly south. On the skyline, but the levels drop away. It's not really appreciable, but to the south of Chadwell Road, levels drop away, so you can probably make out some of the cranes at Tilbury Docks on the skyline. So it sits at the top of the river terrace. Next, please, Wendy. And that's further along that northern boundary, so looking in the opposite direction. You can make out some sort of sporadic trees along that boundary. And again, it's just the open nature of the site. Next slide, please, Wendy.
Sorry, it's taking a while to load.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay, so I mentioned that the application reserves access, but the regulations do say that a potential point of access has to be identified. So that is the potential point of access. If members will be familiar with Woodview, there is a mini roundabout, and the access to the site would potentially be taken from a new arm from that roundabout, and that would be in position where those trees are, right in the centre of the picture there. Next slide, please, Wendy. Okay, that's looking from the eastern corner, so that's looking back up in a sort of westerly, northwesterly direction. There is some that's vegetation along some of the boundaries, so the site is behind those trees and shrubs in the sort of middle distance there. And again, USP College is off to the left-hand side from where that picture's taken. Next one, please, Wendy. So once you get beyond those, shrubs and trees on the boundary, that's from the eastern boundary, looking across the full length of the site. And again, point out it's an open greenbelt site. Next, please, Wendy. And a couple more basically along. This is along the Chadwell Road boundary, the long southern boundary, looking northwest. Next, please, Wendy. Similar view a bit further along there. Again, you can make out the cows which are grazing on the site there, and obviously you've got the existing development on along Woodview. You can make out on the right-hand side of that particular picture. Next, please, Wendy. And taken from outside the college, looking across the site, similar sort of view. You can make out clearly the open nature of the site. Next one, please, Wendy. Similar again from one of the bus stops outside the college, with the the tree and the shrub planting along the southern boundary, and looking into the site. Next, please, Wendy. Okay, so the last couple of pictures, we're nearly there. So again, Chadwell Road, but looking in the opposite direction, so looking in an easterly direction, you can make out some of the existing residential development along Woodview, and the site, clearly is the open field there on the left-hand side. And one more picture, I think. Next one, please, Wendy. Yeah, so that's from the western boundary, which is sort of the thin end of the triangle, looking across the full extent of the site, so the full length of the site, east and west. And it is quite clearly what it is, which is an open agricultural field in the green belt. Now the report, the planning report, which is before you tonight, sets out the background you'll be familiar with. It was originally presented to members at committee on the 25th of June with a recommendation for refusal for two reasons, principally greenbelt, but also a concern about the visual impact of an acoustic barrier. Members resolved to approve the application, and 7 reasons were given. That's referred to at page 34 of the agenda. The application was then, in accordance with the Constitution, re-presented to committee on 16th of July. Again, officers recommended refusal for the 2 reasons, and an analysis of the members' reasons was provided at the granting permission was provided on pages 91 and 97 to 97 of the agenda before you. Clearly, the key issues here are that it is a site in the greenbelt. That being the case, there are 3 key issues for the planning consideration. They are, firstly, whether or not the proposals are appropriate or inappropriate development, and that's with reference to NPPF paragraph 145. Second question, is there harm? And that could be harm by way of inappropriate development, harm to openness, harm to the purposes of the greenbelt, and indeed any other harm. And thirdly, whether the harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations, so that very special circumstances to justify an approval would exist, and that's referred to at paragraphs 143 to 144 of the NPPF. Now, clearly it's new residential buildings. None of the exceptions which are set out at paragraph 145 of the NPPF apply, so it's a straightforward matter to conclude that residential development in Greenbelt is inappropriate development. There is definitional harm thereby, because paragraph 143 of the NPPF says that inappropriate development is by definition harmful. Officers consider that there is harm to openness. So that's both the spatial and visual aspects of openness. There would also be harm from the degree of permanence of the development and harm from activity. Now, those sort of how you assess impact on openness is now guided by some paragraphs within national planning policy guidance, and as I said, that does refer to considerations such as the degree of permanence of the development and the degree of activity. So we concluded there's harm to both spatial and visual aspects of openness. And I've mentioned the acoustic fence. Obviously you have roads on main boundaries there and a degree of activity from traffic, and so an acoustic barrier would be required, and we consider, given the long boundaries of the site, there could be potential harm from an acoustic fence. That would be visual harm. We've also referred previously to harm to the Greenbelt purposes. Now, the Greenbelt has 5 purposes that's set out in paragraph 134 of the NPPF, and we've concluded that there would be some harm to purposes A, C and E, basically because the site is on the edge of the built-up area, and on that picture you can make out Woodview, which is sort of forms a discrete built-up area. Because the site is immediately adjacent to that, there would be some sprawling of the built-up area of that part of Grays. Obviously, it's an open site. It counts as countryside. Countryside can have many different landscape designations. It doesn't have to be rolling fields or areas of outstanding natural beauty. It can be a variety of landscape designations. It is an open field. It is therefore, in a general sense, countryside, and putting 75 residential dwellings in the countryside would cause some harm to the purposes of the Greenbelt in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. And as it's a greenfield site, it's not in line with the purpose of the Greenbelt, which is about assisting urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of urban land. So in terms of the balancing exercise and harm, we've concluded there is definitional harm because it is inappropriate development. There is harm to openness. There is harm to some of the Greenbelt purposes, and you've also got to add in the harm from the to visual amenity from the impact of the barrier. The next side of the planning consideration is, in terms of Greenbelt, is whether or not that harm, so that harm we've identified, is clearly outweighed, and I emphasise the word clearly because that is the NPPF policy test. So is that harm clearly outweighed by other considerations such that very special circumstances exist? Now, the applicant's case for the benefits of the scheme, if you want to put it in those terms, were presented to committee in June, and they are set out on pages 71 to 76 of the agenda. At the June committee, obviously, members had their own reasons why they considered the application should be approved, and we refer to those in the annexes, so that's at pages 91 to 97 of the agenda, and provided an officer analysis of whether we consider those reasons are material or have weight, or how much weight they have. And then finally in July, obviously, the committee then offered reasons why they considered the application should be approved, and we've referred to them, or they are referred to at pages 40 to 45 of the agenda. Now, there is some overlap and some duplication between the considerations which either the applicant or committee have previously referred to. The conclusion we have reached, and we reached it in June and we've reached it in July, and we're still concluding that in our opinion, is that in the Greenbelt balance, if you're attaching substantial weight to Greenbelt harm, which we have to, that's what the NPPF says, and on the other side of the balance, if we're looking at the benefits, the considerations which have been offered by either the committee or by the applicant, we do not consider that harm is clearly outweighed. And again, I emphasise the term clearly outweighed. That is the policy test. If harm isn't clearly outweighed, then very special circumstances do not exist. And therefore, on the Greenbelt argument, it would be the opinion of officers that planning permission should be refused for Greenbelt reasons. Now, to assist members in applying that test, the balancing test, to see whether or not very special circumstances exist, there are a series of questions on the agenda. They're between pages 46 and 52. So they're questions which members may need to address themselves to. And we have provided a commentary of how those questions could be answered to guide members. So that's something we're suggesting members need to look closely at to demonstrate that they've been through that balancing exercise. Very briefly on other planning issues, because all I've said so far is matters relating to Greenbelt. So in terms of other planning considerations, in terms of highways, the highways officer had some concerns or queries about the internal, potentially about the internal layout of the development. However, I've mentioned it's an outline planning application, so layout is a matter which is reserved for future approval. We consider that potentially, if outline permission were to be granted, which we're not recommended, but if it were to be granted, then conditions could address matters such as the internal layout of the site and its impact on highways, etc. The site is not in a flood risk area, so again, subject to conditions, there are no objections to the proposal on those grounds. There are no ecological objections subject to a financial contribution towards the Essex Rams. So that's the mitigation strategy for the Essex coast. So that could be secured via a planning obligation. There are no concerns in terms of air quality. I've mentioned the issue with the acoustic barrier and noise. That is a consideration. So the applicant has submitted a noise assessment, and that looks at both the internal environment of the potential dwellings and the environment of the external spaces. The conclusion from the Council's Environmental Health Officer is that the barrier is needed, principally to protect the outdoor spaces, the private rear garden. So without the barrier, the relevant World Health Organization guidelines for external noise would not be met. So the barrier would be required to serve that purpose. The barrier has an impact on visual amenity of the area. So that does actually form the second reason for refusal. Wrapping all that together, and I appreciate I've talked for quite a while, the key issue in our minds is the Greenbelt issue. The development of 75 houses in the Greenbelt is inappropriate. There would be harm by definition. There would be harm to the spatial and visual aspects of openness in the Greenbelt, and we consider there would be harm to some of the purposes of the Greenbelt, and I've mentioned the impact of the acoustic barrier. We've looked at the considerations offered by the applicant and the reasons which have been offered previously by members of the Planning Committee. We've undertaken that balance and exercise, and we've ascribed varying weights to the factors which have been promoted. We've concluded that the harm is not clearly outweighed, and therefore very special circumstances do not exist. In those circumstances, we're recommending that a decision should be taken in accordance with the Council's policies which seek to protect the Greenbelt, and therefore the application remains recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, for that very detailed report. In the interest of keeping things flowing, what we'll do now is we'll go straight into the speaker statements, and then, of course, our usual questions, debate, and then vote. Wendy, would you be so kind as to read out those statements?
Yes, Chair. So the statement of objection from Sean Meehan, who's a resident. Earlier this year, I wrote my reasons for strongly objecting the proposals, and my feelings remain the same today. However, if concessions were promised, I would be less so. 1. The roads surrounding the land are already very busy and are at this time not fit for purpose to accommodate another 75 homes in such a small area. The junction between Woodview and Chadwell Road traffic lights is particularly horrendous and suffers well and truly with immense noise and no doubt high pollution levels. At peak times, vehicle queues on Woodview can easily reach 20 to 30 deep. The whole area is effectively an amphitheatre of noise with no real sound shielding, and a new development would of course increase this. Having a young family and living as close to the junction as I do, all of the above already has an effect on daily living standards. 2. I can see within the plans that the potential entry point into the new development would be via Woodview. Given what I have already mentioned so far, I strongly disagree with this. I simply cannot support the plans until alternatives are brought forward to help the current traffic flow / noise and air pollution levels at the junction and surrounding roads. Concessions. 1. Any entry point to the new development should be via Chadwell Road, further away from nearby homes. 2. I would think about permanently blocking Woodview after the mini roundabout that serves Culverin Avenue into the newish estate if you are coming from Blackshots, and any vehicles requiring coming from Chadwell Road use the current bus-only route, with improvements like making it two-way on the other side of the land that appears to not get used at all. The planting of many more trees, especially the land near the junction of Woodview and Chadwell Road, traffic lights. I have tried for well over a year to have this arranged with the council, but to no availability. It desperately needs huge amounts of shielding to help counter the current noise/air pollution levels. 3. Introduce high-speed bumps to the whole surrounding area of Woodview and Chadwell Road. The amount of vehicles speeding is ridiculous, and I'm surprised none have been introduced already, considering the college is so close by. The second speaker statement of objection is from Joyce Redsell, the ward councillor. This is a piece of land between the wards of Little Thurrock Rectory and Little Thurrock Blackshots. In the ward of Blackshots, there was an influx of housing in development on the old college site, which brought over 400 new homes to the area, which added more congestion to this part of the ward. This is a piece of greenbelt that needs to remain as greenbelt. The land in the 60s had toxic waste put there. The doctor's surgery is full to capacity, so are the schools. As local councillors, we have tried to calm some of the traffic problems in this area, working with the residents to achieve this, as we had an extension to Woodside School, also an extension to Treetop School. In the plans for the school, we are hoping to succeed in calming the traffic pollution. This application will undo all the hard work that has been achieved. The road network is not sustainable with Palmer's College on one side and 2 schools on the other side. It is called Woodview for a reason. If more housing is allowed here on this small piece of green belt, there will be no view. There are not any relevant reasons for housing to be placed here. Just because the land is there, it does not mean it has to be built upon. Greenbelt is there to stop urban sprawl. The development would have a detrimental effect on the area. In Thurrock, we are trying to cut down on travelling by car. This would just add more traffic to this area. This small piece of land is what keeps a small amount of openness to this part of the ward. I cannot see any special circumstances to warrant this piece of land being used for housing. The road capacity is not there, especially when schools are in situ. What we do not touch on very often is the wildlife in our greenbelt and the loss of trees. The borough is trying to put in more trees, not less. This is very near the A13 and the Dock Approach Road. The area has enough traffic problems at this moment in time without adding to it. This development would bring chaos and devastation to the Woodside estate. I have noticed that you have had many letters from residents against this application. And the third statement is a statement of support from Gary Coxshaw, the agent. With regard to this application, we would like to point out the following points, all of which are explained in more detail in the design, access and planning statement that was submitted with the application. The statement that was submitted with the application clearly demonstrates why this application should be acceptable, and I highlight the points for consideration below. It describes in section 2 the sustainability credentials of the site in respect of local facilities. It provides the details of special circumstances that exist in section 3 in respect of the council's lack of 5-year housing supply and the important contribution small and medium-sized sites make to meeting the housing need, as they can usually be built out relatively quickly. The site is located within strategic parcel number 31 in a council's strategic greenbelt assessment, and in terms of checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas and preventing neighbouring towns merging is considered to have a slight/negligible importance, and in our opinion not undermine the purpose of the greenbelt. Section 4 provides details of government and local planning policy that supports development. It is important to note that the proposal meets the council's policy in respect of section 106 contributions and affordable housing.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Wendy. All right then, so councillors, that now opens us up to questions before we go into debate. What I'll do as we're remote is, if you would like to ask a question, if we could keep it to a couple of questions each, and then I'll move from councillor to councillor. That is, of course, if there are any further questions. So with that, would anyone like to ask either the monitoring officer, the QC, or Matt Gallagher any questions?
Yes, please, Chair.
And if you do, go ahead.
Yes, when it comes to acoustic fencing, I was a bit surprised about this, because I went down to Hog Lane, which is a big roundabout. And you'd be probably aware, Matthew, that some years ago there were 2 showroom houses on that roundabout. when it was being developed. And when they'd finished the development on that Chapel 100 site, what they'd done was they turned those 2 showrooms into 40 flats. Now, there is no acoustic fencing there. And furthermore, when you look at Woodview, on the newer homes, there's no acoustic fencing there. So I'm just perturbed why we actually need this acoustic fencing in light of the Hog Lane situation. And of course, up by Woodview itself, where the old college site was, there's no acoustic fencing at all on those 400 homes.
Chair, if I can come back to Councillor Rice's question. So I really can't comment on the Hog Lane scheme. That would have been some time ago. As a general point, standards change over time. And it used to be the case that local planning authorities were working to something called PPG 24, which was a planning practice guidance note on noise. That is no longer the case. We're working to a different set of regulations now. It's more World Health Organization guidance now. All I can say is the applicant's agent, in submitting the application, submitted a noise assessment. That assessment would only have been put in if noise, in my mind, logically, if noise would have been identified by the applicant as a potential issue. So the applicant has volunteered a noise assessment as part of their submission, along with a transport statement, flood risk, etc., etc. So the applicant volunteered an assessment. The council's environmental health officer has looked at it, and I have his response in front of me, or one of his responses in front of me. And to put it in a nutshell, because I'm not going to read through a page of closely typed text, but it's the external spaces which he considers quote, cannot be so easily protected to meet World Health Organization guidelines. So there is an issue with outdoor spaces, i.e. people's gardens, if they're living in a dwelling house, or shared amenity space for flats. The way to deal with that would be an acoustic barrier. So a fence. I really can't comment on the Woodview scenario, because obviously a number of the houses in Woodview are probably interwar, so they predate the Planning Act. The more recent houses, which were built probably in the past 10 years, I'd have to check out what was submitted at the time. But obviously, I can assume that the council's environmental health officer didn't raise an issue at that time because of their relationship with the road. I mean, the key point, or the key difference in my mind here, is you have a site which is surrounded on 2 principal boundaries by busy roads. Obviously, Woodview is only on one side of that recent residential development.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions?
Councillor Lawrence has her hand up, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to ask your question?
Apart from the affordable housing, is it also true that this applicant is prepared to put 600,000 towards education in this borough? Could this be clarified, please?
Yeah, Chair. So if permission were to be granted, we would be pursuing a legal agreement with the applicant, and that would secure a number of things. That would secure policy compliant affordable housing, so that would be 35% affordable housing on site, in line with the council's own planning policies. It would secure a financial contribution towards healthcare, and it would secure financial contributions to education contribution. Now, the sum of money is 6 figures, yes. The reason for us asking for that contribution is because our colleagues in the education department have looked at the impact 75 dwellings would have on school places locally, and they've concluded there would be obviously increased demand. If you're looking at family houses, that has an impact on school places. So the financial contribution, which I can't confirm right at the moment because I've got papers spread around everywhere, but it is 6 figures, would be mitigation for the impact of the development. So it's the money which would provide the school places which would be generated by occupants, potential occupants of the future development.
So that sort of money, that would help with a lot of issues and concerns from residents, what they was talking about with the education and the school places. So I take it that amount of money would help quite a bit, wouldn't it? And help residents and alleviate a lot of the problems and help this borough quite a bit. So the applicant is prepared, I think, to sort of put his money in and help the area. Thank you.
Chair, on that point, it's worth emphasising this is mitigation for the educational demands which are created by this development. So there is a formula which looks at the number of residential units, the size of the residential units, and applies a multiplier. It's quite a mathematical exercise, but the purpose is to equate residential units with the number of school-aged children who would be potentially living on the site, and then to look at school rolls locally. Now, if it's the case that there is capacity in schools in the local area, we don't ask for a financial contribution because it's not justified. So if there's capacity in the local schools and the education department divide the area up, the borough up geographically into different zones for primary and for secondary. So if it's the case that the education department come back to the planning department and say, we're fine, we have capacity in our local schools, then we don't ask for a contribution. So the fact that they're asking for a contribution says to me, perhaps there isn't the capacity and therefore they need to start building in the capacity. So I can perhaps see where Councillor Lawrence is going in terms of, well, is it a benefit? I'd suggest it's mitigating the impact of the development.
Thank you, Matthew, for that. I think it is a benefit, actually, and it's going to help a lot of concerns what have been brought up earlier. So it proves that we can overcome this sort of thing.
Sorry, everyone, just wait a minute. The chair's gone. Let me try and call him back in.
Tom? Thomas? Fletcher? Might have to bring on the sub.
You leave me out of this.
Chairman's got walkabout.
Let's just give him a minute. I think he's back on. Councillor Kelly, are you there?
Yeah, Wendy, sorry about that. It was just a connection drop. Yeah, I got to the end of Matt's response there to Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Fletcher, I can see you raising your hands.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Something I didn't quite understand, I wondered if Matt could enlarge on that a bit. He mentioned in his presentation that he thought there were grounds for being able to adapt this application in a way that it wouldn't be such a problem. Could he elaborate on that a bit, unless I was misunderstanding him?
Chair, was that question about my presentation or Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, it was a question in your presentation, Matt. You said, now, unless I misunderstood you, you said something to the effect of you felt there were ways in which the application could become more acceptable. Obviously, in your view, it isn't at the minute. If I understood that right, could you elaborate a bit?
Yeah, Chair, I think I was possibly referring to, I mean, the officer recommendation is quite clear, and I think we've been consistent with that. I've referred you to the fact that the principal issue here is Greenbelt, and I've referred you to the fact that there is a balancing exercise to be undertaken, because if it is an inappropriate development, which it clearly is, then the harm, and I've mentioned the harm has to be clearly outweighed. So there's a balancing exercise of harm against other considerations. Now, you're entitled to reach a conclusion about how you weigh the other considerations, but it's our firm view that in terms of what has been presented thus far by the applicant and the reasons which members have referred to thus far, that harm isn't clearly outweighed. I was looking through my notes of my presentation. I'm happy to be corrected by anybody else, but I don't think I refer to a situation where the proposal could be amended to make it acceptable, because this is a matter of principle, Greenbelt principle. Either you consider the harm is clearly outweighed, in which case very special circumstances can exist, or you consider that the harm isn't clearly outweighed, in which case a refusal would logically follow.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, this is why I asked the question, because my understanding is you can't adapt the fact that it's on Greenbelt. It either is or it isn't, and this is.
Yeah, Chair, I referred to in presentation to the extract from the council's core strategy proposals map. So the site is in the Greenbelt. That's inescapable. So the nub of the consideration is, in terms of Greenbelt, there's harm. It's whether you consider that there are other considerations which clearly outweigh that harm, such that very special circumstances could exist. Our opinion is that harm isn't clearly outweighed, but that's the key point for committee tonight, as it was back in June and July.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions before we head to debate? Okay, I can't see any hands raised. Wendy, can you see anything at your end?
No, Chair, there's no hands raised.
Okay then, so no further questions. We'll now enter into the debate stage of the application. So we have looked at this before. We've gone through this. We spent quite a lot of time on it last time round. Obviously, being from the area myself, I can confirm that there is a lot of pressure in that area at the moment. I think what's interesting about this parcel of land, obviously, that there has, as councillors, you've shown interest that we could potentially develop on it. I think for me today, again, like last time, I can't vote for this for two reasons. One being the Greenbelt aspect. But interestingly enough, I'm not entirely against development on a future date. For me, I think I'd like to see it go through the local plan. I'd like to see it go through the correct process before we get to that stage. In terms of the World Health Organization, obviously they have made representation that the acoustic fencing will be required. I appreciate that there's not acoustic fencing in the area, but obviously this is here today. You know, we are responsible for this decision, and I think this year of all years, I think we should be taking the World Health Organization very seriously. And if they're saying that acoustic fencing is needed, then quite clearly it will be needed. But to me, it also highlights that it's probably not the ideal place for somewhere to raise a family. So again, I won't go on too much further. I know the local councillors don't want it. We've had quite a lot of resident representation saying they don't want it. And of course, the monitoring officer and the QC's advice has also confirmed that it's not ideal. So I've got nothing further to say. What I'll do, I'll open this up now to members for you to debate and contribute. There is a recommendation which is for refusal, which I will be moving. And obviously, if we do find ourselves in a situation where we don't refuse, obviously, I think given the fact that we've rescinded this, we need to come up with something fresh and something new if we was to go down that path. So I've got nothing further to add. I will now hand it over to anyone else. Now, Councillor Rice, I think you've got your hand raised,
Yes.
And then we'll go on to someone else. Thank you.
Yes. Well, Chair, in my eyes, this is a piece of scrubland. You know, it's of no use to anyone except some people that need homes. And as I've said to you all the way along, here we are with an authority with a 10-year waiting list. Now, it's all right for every one of us on this screen. We all have homes. But we will be assisting 26 families to get a rung on the ladder, which is important. And as I've always said, Chair, Thurrock is a failing authority. We do not have a 5-year supply, a housing supply. Furthermore, we don't have a 20% buffer, which we are supposed to have through government guidelines. So we're failing. We don't have a viable local plan, an up-to-date local plan. We do have a core strategy. We have no call for sites. And now, when you look at the whole area, you're within a couple of miles of a growth zone called the Port of Tilbury, where not only have you got the Port of Tilbury, but you've got the Amazon warehousing and a few other large employers around there, and people need homes. Now, what we need to do is start to correct that. And because we haven't got a 5-year housing supply, the government will take a dim view of it. We don't even have a 20% buffer, which is very regrettable. This area already has good bus services. Whether we like it or not, it has a good road network, and it has cycle paths, and there's lots of surrounding parks nearby, so that you can start to see that there's plenty of amenities in the surrounding areas. We look at Greenbelt, and Greenbelt does not, as one might assume, correlate with green or protected land. This site is not a protected site. It's not a site of special scientific interest. It's not a heritage coast. It's not a heritage asset. It's not a national park. There's no flood risk problems. We're not anywhere near historic towns. And this is a small area of land that can have a big impact in terms of social and economic gains. And what Councillor Lawrence has already said, in the 106 that would be attached to this, there's some almost £600,000 towards schooling. And what's interesting, people make a big play about the healthcare. If healthcare was so, shall we say, underrepresented in that area, we would be going for a large contribution towards healthcare, where in actual fact, it's buried in the papers that the 106 would be 29,700. So we can see there's not an awful lot wrong with the healthcare in that locality. So what I'm saying to you is that we're within a few miles of the growth zone, which is Tilbury. And of course, we must bear in mind that we have a 10-year waiting list. Not 2 years, not 3, 10 years. And these good people that will have these homes, obviously, will look forward to them. And I would suggest, Chair, that on this occasion, we do depart from our policy. And I will be, later on in the meeting, putting forward an alternative recommendation, Chair. And thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Rice, for your comments there. Obviously, we'll see where we get to. Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Byrne, I will bring you in just quickly, picking over some of the comments that you made there, Councillor Rice. In terms of the scrubland, ultimately, that is a matter of opinion. The local elected councillors perceive it to be more than that. The residents that have written in to say that they don't want this development have obviously perceive it to be more than that. You raised a few worthwhile points there. First of all, the 600,000, it adds no weight to me on the basis that the officers have said that will only cover potentially the families that move in there. So that's not a benefit, that's just a cover. You mentioned there about flood risk. I think respectfully, when we look at Little Thurrock Marshes last month, that was in a flood risk zone and we approved it. What I'm trying to say there is we can't use the fact that it's not in a flood risk zone as a reason to promote this project when we promote projects that are in flood risk zones. And in relation to the Port of Tilbury, well, quite frankly, you could put anything, anywhere in Thurrock to cover the jobs that might come from the Port of Tilbury. The fact of the matter is Grays is a red zone in terms of accessibility to open spaces and parks. I received an email this week from Friends of the Earth saying that Grays is quite frankly a disgrace when it comes to accessibility to one's mental health and green space. So looking at what we went through last time, what I think we need to do, if we're going to approve this, we need to add something more than what the QC has already said. Today, we have a member of the QC's council with us saying it's simply not good enough. And we use QCs quite a lot to approve applications. So we should use them and listen to them when they're saying that this is a bad idea. So I understand what you're saying. That's good arguments there. I'll move you over to Councillor Fletcher.
Sorry, Chair. I think Matt Gallagher had his hand up first as well.
Yeah, Chair, there's just a couple of things Councillor Rice referred to, which I think it is important to come back with a response to. Now, Councillor Rice mentioned it's scrubland. Well, that's an opinion. Going back to Greenbelt, which is the key issue, as I've said, the fact that the site is open is its value. So, and Councillor Rice said, it's not a protected area, it's not a national park, it's not an area of outstanding national beauty. That's academic. It's open land. That is one of the primary purposes of Greenbelt. The defining characteristics of the Greenbelt are openness and permanence. So the fact that it's open means it serves a Greenbelt purpose and it is of use for that purpose. On the one other thing, I think or a couple more things, on the waiting list thing. Now, Councillor Rice referred to a 10-year waiting list. Now, we did look at this issue after the June committee. So on page 91 to 92 of the agenda, we have contacted the Council's Housing Department and they've provided us with figures which are set out on the page at the top of page 92. And to summarise, yes, there is a waiting list. The greatest demand is for 1 and 2 bedroom properties. And based on those applicants who are actively bidding for a property, that waiting time varies between 1.9 years for a 3-bedroom property, 5.4 years for a 4-bedroom property, and for smaller 1 and 2 bedroom, it's between 4 and 4.1 years. So it's not 10 years, it is less than that. I'm not going to labour a point about, you know, development plan, local plan. The council doesn't have an up-to-date local plan. The council has a development plan, which is up to date in terms of greenbelt policies, in my opinions. And we have undertaken call for sites recently, and no doubt the applicant will be promoting this site. On the healthcare thing, the figure of £29,000 is the figure which has been suggested by NHS England. Or NHS, or the regional body for NHS, which covers Thurrock. So that's a matter for them. I don't think you can assume that there are no healthcare issues in this part of Grays based on that figure. That is the figure which has been suggested to us by NHS England. So you just have to take it as read that that's what they need, again, to mitigate the impact of development, similar to the education contribution. It's about mitigating the impact of this development. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just going to check the order. I understand it was actually Councillor Byrne next, and then on to Councillor Fletcher, and then Steve Taylor. So Councillor Byrne.
Just one point of order. Are the officers allowed to debate? Because it seems to be they are debating, and is that okay? Can I check that one?
Sorry, when you say are the officers allowed to debate, I think what Matt was doing there was.
I thought we debated and they put their motions forward, but they seem to be debating. So I don't think that's right, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, let's carry on. Whether I agree or not, for consistency, I think to reach this point, I hope everybody really votes as they did previously. There's loads of issues like this have gone through with the same or similar reasons. We've also seen planning go through just purely for carrots. If we reject this, we have to go back on things like the golf course, any plans on Lower Danton Road, Thurrock Marshes. This 600,000, for example, is just a carrot. It has nothing to do with planning. And all of Gerard's arguments are sound. And the chair has also said that this will go through in the local plan anyway. So we're just bringing this forward. So I am going to vote totally against it, but I think if we don't push this through, we have wasted, well, I've wasted 2 years, because this has been a constant thing. We push it through and then we bring in this boomerang and bring it back again. So just the arguments are sound. Gerard's put up sound arguments and people voted with him. I haven't agreed with him for the whole year, but Gerard has put through and the committee have gone with it. So I cannot see why we're back again. So that's just my point of view. This has to go through, or we're got to go back on so many other things. So that's just my view. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Going to disagree slightly with Gary there. I think Councillor Rice's reasoning is very sound, but not for this development. Yes, it's true that we do not have a sufficient amount of housing for the next 5 years. We know this. These points are made. The the need within Thurrock for suitable housing, particularly for affordable housing, absolutely, totally agree. And indeed, those same needs are brought up for pretty well any development that we ever have put before us. I think it's the right question, but the wrong answer. I would only be looking at this at a greenbelt area to try and meet our need for housing if there weren't enough brown belt or totally acceptable areas. And are we saying that there are no areas, no sites available or in the pipeline on which we could build? Only then should we be saying that because we don't have sufficient housing, therefore we should build on Greenbelt. Because frankly, if we were going to do that, let's go do it properly. Let's build a massive new town somewhere in the north of the borough, and let's stop pissing around. So, yeah, totally agree with the shortage. These are not, as I think the officers have made clear to us, these are not sufficient reasons to build on Greenbelt. They're sufficient reasons to build. But unless there are no other alternatives, they're not sufficient reasons to build on Greenbelt.
Thank you. Steve Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a few things that have been said I think are somewhat misleading, and obviously you know my views of the Greenbelt, but one of the comments that was made by, I think it was Councillor Rice, said about this land isn't protected. Well, the whole point of it being Greenbelt is it is protected. That's what Greenbelt is. So it may not be a site of specific interest in itself as it stands, but the fact is it is protected by its Greenbelt designation. So it's wrong to say it's scrubland, and it's because it isn't. It's a part of the Greenbelt, and by its designation as part of the Greenbelt, it is protected. I know it's been said, but I'm going to say it again, the 600,000 or whatever it is for for schooling or for children, you have to understand it's going to cost that £600. So if the houses aren't there, you don't incur the cost. If they are there, you do incur the cost. So it's a net zero gain. It's largely irrelevant as far as I can see. There was also a comment made about the need for housing, the need for social housing, and the length of the waiting list. But I didn't notice anywhere that this says this is social housing that's going to be provided. Therefore, I'm not sure that addresses the need for social housing that was raised. And the last kind of point that I just picked up on is you talk about the need for housing in the area, and Councillor Fletcher made the point about building a new town. But one of the things to think about is we're already doing that in Purfleet, which is going to be the new part of a new town, and also the Arena Essex development, which will be the sort of lakeside increase. So there's two massive developments going on down there anyway. So the issue around using a bit of Greenbelt when you've already got two huge sites going to be developed, it just doesn't make sense, and I'm sure it would be legally challenged. So I won't go on any longer. You know my views on the Greenbelt anyway, but thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And I understand Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I've been listening to what all the other councillors have to say and the officers. I did make some points what I wrote down, but to be honest, I could have commented on what everybody said. Luckily for everyone here tonight, I can't remember everything what I really want to say. But the main thing is, to put it in one big whole loop, the reason we're here tonight, I think, is because we can't agree that our decision was lawful. They're saying it's unlawful. But my point being is that you can't expect members' decisions to be the same as in legal terms all the time, because we're not legal people. We're here, we're more common sense people and talking on behalf of the people that live around here. So we can sit here all night and disagree why we want it or why we don't want it. What we're here for tonight is to make our terms sound more lawful. I don't think they need to be, but obviously the officers think we do. And the other thing what I'm bringing up, so I'm so glad that I'm actually seeing Mr. Hunt tonight. I've heard about you, but I've never actually seen you before. Is that what Matthew said earlier? It's a matter of principle, and I think that's another thing why we are here tonight. Because, like what Councillor Byrne says, this is going to happen all the time. Every time we disagree with what the officers say, we're going to be brought back because we're not putting it in the right sort of terms, which is legal enough for you. So I think this is why normally it's been sent away for an outsider to decide. So is this going to be the way it's going to be from now on? Every time we disagree with the officers, it's going to be brought back. And I know some of the ward councillors here tonight don't want this proposal, and I accept what they agree on. But what I really want you to think about tonight, fellow ward councillors, is that the next time a planning could be coming in your area, on your ward, which you don't agree with, and then it's going to be brought back. So sometimes I think, like the officers unite, we should start thinking about why we are here, and are we going to be put into consideration what we say, took seriously. So that's the whole thing tonight. The other thing as well is that I too don't want to build on green, but there isn't enough green belt, and we know that some of it has to be took away. So do we say let's build on a little spare piece of grass down our road, like in my ward in Bellis, where they was considering building houses in a circular part of grass down Humber Avenue until everybody got together and said no. Think about the other part, what I've got down here, after I said can't expect us to talk and explain things in legal terms, is the visual impact of the acoustic. I don't think that's got any weight for reason for refusal. This is just for outline planning. And also, in the diagram tonight, which was shown by Matthew, the preliminary planning, there was all trees on it, all around the area. So who says there's not going to be trees there as a sound barrier and protection for the environment anyway? We don't know this. We don't know how it's going to be. So how can they refuse it when we don't know what the full planning's going to be? So I don't give them any weight on their refusal for that. I don't even think that should be part of their reason for refusal, because that should be discussed later on. And let's face it, it's been quite a few months, isn't it? Quite a few months that's been sitting on the table in the planning officer's department where this could have been discussed about. But it hasn't, has it? It's just been left, and we've been dragged back in again and been told off like children. So this is what we've got to think about here. The other thing, after the boundary, which I don't agree with, I think that special circumstances here is because I think that later on, Seavic and Palmer's will probably start building on that land opposite, and they're going to need more teachers. So this was one of the reasons why I think this is an ideal piece of land. I know the officers said, oh, that hasn't been brought up, but we know it's going to be. And they more or less said tonight, and by Tom, that in a couple of years' time, this is going to be built on anyway. And when it's allowed to be built on in a few years' time, will the applicant want to give us 35%? Will he want to give us 35% homes then? He might not have to. So why should we turn down this great offer now for something what we might not get later on? That's another thing what we've got to consider.
Well done. Jenny?
In the context of an out-of-date plan as well, and where some sacrifice of greenbelt is unavoidable in order to provide enough homes in the borough, this scheme provides substantial social benefits relative to its size. That's the other thing which I think it should be took down into consideration. And like I said, I think it's been July since it's been sitting with the officers. I think the way forward, and I hope Mr. Ian Hunt listens to this, is that officers and us councillors all work together and try and find a way forward, because I can see this happening again. I know from a previous email which I've had and I've had to forward on, that a past application which we granted has been sitting there and left. So does that mean that they're waiting to see how this one goes before they decide on the next one? So I think we've all got to work together on this, and we should all sit down and go through the proposals again and try and make them sound a little bit more legal to please the officers, so we can send this off and get this moving once and for all. And I might add as well, I was quite happy to go out in public with this, because I'm getting to the point now where I'm walking around and feeling really bad about saying yes to building things on Greenbelt, but I've been really quiet about it because I'm trying to do the right thing. But if this wants to go out and the officer's making me feel like I'm the bad person, then I'm quite prepared to go out there and tell it all.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments there, Councillor Lawrence. And I think I've got some hands up from Councillors Fletcher, then Rice. Before we go further, just want to clarify some of the comments that I made. What I said, I don't want anything to be built on this site now. And particularly, I don't want anything built on it in the future. What I was saying is via the local plan, there may be an option to develop on the site. So that's what I was trying to say. That's not to say it will be. I'm just saying, if you're going to develop on it, it needs to go through the correct process. Now, I've been on the council for 10 years. I know that officers have been here a lot longer than that. This is the first time it's happened, and we've probably approved about 400 applications in the last 15 years. So to suggest that this is a common occurrence or it's going to keep on happening is simply not the case. The reason this is brought back is because we are approving applications and we are not coming up with good enough reasons, legal reasons, to approve them. Quite frankly, I think it's irresponsible. Now, you may think it's a good idea, and we have powers as councillors to approve these applications, but they need to be sound. And from what I've heard, there is nothing new to this other than what we heard a few months ago. Ian Hunt's not bringing it back for a laugh. He doesn't want this on his desk, does he? The reality of this situation is we are approving applications which are quite frankly an abuse of power. And that is the reality of the situation. It's not about being passionate about building on the green belt. It's not an abuse of power or telling councillors you can't have what you want. If we do these things, they need to be sound. And if this goes ahead, we are open to a legal challenge. We have a member of the Queen's Council with us here this evening. That member of the Queen's Council has overlooked that previous decision and said the council was exposed. I'm not quite sure what part of that is not getting through. Councillor Fletcher.
To be honest, Tom, I think you've said it.
We'll go to Councillor Rice and Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lawrence did have a few points there. When we talk about a judicial review, what we must make sure of ourselves is that this has been out in the public domain now for 5 months, and there has not been one individual go to any court to rectify a decision that the council has made, because what the councillors did say, Ian, back in June and July, that this should go off to the Secretary of State. And I think that's why people get a bit hot under the collar, because 5 months later, Ian, you and your department have not dealt with this problem. It should have gone up to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State should be the judge and jury, because ultimately we have a Prime Minister saying we have a national emergency, and a national emergency is unemployment. So what do we do in unemployment? We build homes, we build roads, we build infrastructure. And I just hope that if we do pass this tonight, Ian, along with other applications that are sitting in your office, that they duly go up to the Secretary of State, because this is the process that we must follow, because it is up to the Secretary of State. It's not up to you, me, to be judge and jury. The Secretary of State will decide whether this is an illegal application or not. And I doubt very much, and I've been on the planning boards and committees since '96, I have never seen a judicial review of one application since '96 on this council. So I'm very concerned of what's happened tonight. I've gone along with it because That's what we've been told to do. But what we must remember is that members are here to decide and officers are here to advise. Now, whether we take your advice or not, that is a matter for members. And, you know, that's where it should be. And I just hope that we can work together. And if this application was approved tonight, it goes off to the Secretary of State forthwith. There's no waiting for another 4 or 5 months, Ian, because that's unacceptable. We don't treat applicants like that. And that's why Thurrock is a failing authority. We haven't got a 5-year supply. We haven't got a 20% buffer zone. And furthermore, we fail government targets year on year, Ian. And where are all these facts? On our website, Ian. So I just want people to be aware of that. We are failing in our duties and we need to correct it, because there are families out there, Ian, that need homes. We are the lucky ones on this screen this evening. We already have homes. They don't. They are people that are living on sofas. We've got an applicant here prepared to give us 26 homes. And now we can't turn that down lightly. And I just rest my case on that.
Sorry, Ian, I didn't see that your hand was up there. Did you want to come in? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a very brief point, if I may, just to come back to the relevant councillors, particularly Councillor Rice and Councillor Lawrence. First up, the reason that this matter has been brought back before committee was dealt with in the previous report, and you know, this is just to be very clear. It has not been brought back explicitly because members decided to overturn officer recommendation. That is not the basis for why we're here. The reason principally was that the reasons given by members didn't address the key test as to whether or not the benefits that were identified were enough to outweigh the significant balance that must be done with regard to the green belt policy test. Now, if members, and Councillor Rice gave an indication that he was indicating he intended to put forward a resolution that was for approval, if members wish to do that, that is a perfectly acceptable process for members to do. And as you rightly say, members are the decision makers with regard to these issues. However, it's my job to remind members that in order to do that, they must do so within the legal framework that you all have to comply with. And also we need to make sure that we hit the relevant points. Hence why we have indicated and provided members with additional support this evening. If you look into the officer report there are the 7 questions, which hopefully if members were to utilise that in order to balance the relevant factors, it will aid members in coming to a decision. That is the process for it. To a certain extent, I could turn around and say I'm agnostic as to whether members approve or refuse. Clearly, looking at the policies myself in discussion with the planning officers, I think there is weight to the planning officer's argument that this should be a refusal. However, if members are able to structure an appropriate legal set of grounds, I will have no problem with that going forward. Just to turn around and reflect slightly on the point regarding the fact that nobody has yet issued a judicial review proceedings, that would be premature at this point. Looking at because we haven't issued the planning permission. Had we done so, we may well have had a judicial review, but we don't know whether that's the case because we're back here. In terms of Secretary of State referral, the Secretary of State has the power to call in applications, that's entirely right, but that power is heavily constrained and they only do so in a fairly limited set of circumstances. It is incorrect to assert that the Secretary of State looks at each application and determines whether or not it is out and out an acceptable decision. It's whether or not it meets their threshold for calling, which is around significance of the issue and the impact that that would have. So hopefully that is a little bit of explanation to assist. In terms of delay, yes, I acknowledge we'd like to do these things faster, and we are working on that. But you know, there's a point there, and perfectly happy to accept that and apologise to the applicant in that regard. Hopefully, Chair, that's picked up the points that were outstanding. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Oh, sorry,
Chair,
I was going to go over to Councillor Byrne and then maybe Fletcher.
A question for Ian. Is this a test run? Because this is obviously going to be the first of many, because there's been so many very similar, very, very iffy deals gone through lately. So is this like the one to see if this goes through, or is this like the test one or the beta site, and then we go on to at the marshes, we go on to all the ones that we have just built on Greenbelt, because the Secretary of State might click his fingers and say, let's build it. So I'm just saying, is this like the forerunner of, we're going to keep coming back and back? So agree with Angela. The vote's been done, and the vote is however you decide, but is this like this one, and then there's going to be another one, and another one, another? Because we have to be consistent. If this is come through, I can think of at least 4 that you have to do the same with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher, did you have your hand up? I wasn't sure, sorry.
I did. Thanks, Chair. I think it's probably worth going through to the vote. I don't think we're going to say anything else that's going to convince. I think people's minds are made up. What I would say is that when we talk about working together, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not known for agreeing with officers, but for my money, exactly as both Councillor Rice and Ian Hunt have said, yes, we're there to decide, but the officers are there to advise. And frankly, I would rather have the officers letting me know when I'm about to be part of a decision that could be clobbered. The Secretary of State is not there, whatever party he's from. The Secretary of State is not there to clean up our mess. And I would far rather know about the car crash before I hit it. So thank you, Ian, and the members of the planning team for putting your case. However we vote, I think you had every right to do so. And I think, you know, playing together as a team doesn't mean we shut down criticism. We need to hear it, we need to think about it, and I would hope that at the end of this, everybody votes, whatever they voted before, but everybody votes based on a rational understanding of the points that have been put, the potential consequences, and whether they think the application on its merits is worth going for.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne, did you want to come back there? I think everyone said what they wanted to say.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, you didn't let Ian answer the question. He went straight on to Fletch. So my question was ignored, and then he went on to Fletch. So is he answer it, or is my question irrelevant?
Sorry, Gary.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Byrne. What I'll do, I'll invite Ian in just to confirm, Councillor Byrne. My understanding is the only one that's outstanding at the moment is Little Thurrock Marshes. I don't personally think it's going to become a common thing, and the reason I don't think that is you could look at Langdon Hills as a prime example. I felt that the arguments were good, substantive, and ultimately that one did get passed on. It may become a regularity if the committee continues to make decisions that are not based up by evidence that members of the Queen's Council don't agree with. So, Ian, did you want to come in and answer Councillor Byrne's question? Thank you.
Just a very brief one. In all seriousness, Chair, I would hope that this remains an extremely rare occurrence. Each case would be treated on its own merits, and I wouldn't want to sort of draw any inference, or I wouldn't want members tonight to think that they've got to do a particular thing in order to either encourage or avoid repeats of this. Cases are what they are, and decisions are what they are. Each is looked at on its own merits. So I think the thing I would suggest for members is you have guidance explicitly before you tonight on this application, and it's this application that we should be considering and making a decision on, and it is around those specific points around making sure that whatever decision members are making, they are addressing the relevant points of policy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm just about to head to the vote. I think, Steve, did you have your hand up? And then we'll move. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, I did. Just a couple of things. I'm going to say them again because I'm not sure that people have, perhaps everybody's grasped some of the meanings. So the application, when people talk about it, how quickly it will be built and so on, it's and I know Matt said it, but it's an outline application. So all you're doing there is establishing the principle of development. As for whatever plan's been put forward as a, it could look like this, it's irrelevant because it's meaningless until it's put forward for full planning. The other point I'd make to some of the councillors is you've got a lot of the people that currently are your constituents. Some of them you keep talking about failing the people that are on housing waiting lists, but actually you're sort of failing some of the existing taxpayers if they think it's unacceptable. And the final point, and I've said it before, but the affordable housing is not social housing. It's housing at a cost that's considered based on a government statistic. I can even tell you where are we? I'll read it. It's very short. Affordable housing is housing which is deemed affordable to those with a median household income or below, as rated by the national government or a local government by a recognised housing affordability index. It's not social housing. That's the point. I know I've said it before, but I'm not sure quite how that necessarily addresses your waiting list for housing. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you everyone for your contributions so far. I don't think there was anything other to say. Obviously, I think well, we've got two potential votes here. One is a recommendation 8.1, which is a recommendation of to refuse the planning permission. So what I'd like to do, obviously, I'd like to go there first if that's seconded, and then obviously if that's recommended for refusal, then that's that. But then obviously if it's lost, then we then enter a substantive vote or alternative vote. Councillor Byrne, I can see your hand up. Are you in favour of that recommendation?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So what we'll do, we'll head to the vote. We'll take our time to make sure we get this right. I'll go through to the councillors one by one. So obviously myself and Councillor Byrne have recommended refusal, so that's 2 votes. I'll go to Councillor Fletcher.
In favour.
In favour of refusal. Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Salmons.
Sorry, I'm against.
That's just to confirm, that's against refusal, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and Councillor Shinnick.
Against.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Against.
And Councillor Lawrence.
Against.
Okay, all right then. So that recommendation for refusal has been lost. Councillor Rice, did you want to submit a secondary vote?
Yes, please, Chair. So, The reasons for departing from the officer's advice this evening is, number one, Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply of housing, nor a 20% buffer, and it also is failing year on year in delivering housing targets that the government sets. Number two, there is not an up-to-date local plan with a call for sites. So what we're faced with really is applicants will put applications in and we have to consider them on their merits. And number three, economically, this area is a growth area, and we're talking about the Port of Tilbury, Tilbury 2, the Amazon warehousing, vast expanse of employment there, so that we do need housing. And this is it's a major contribution of local employment, so that we actually need some affordable homes. This applicant's prepared to give us the full 35% affordable homes, so that has to be a major plus. And number five, the creation of employment is greatly needed in these uncertain times of COVID-19. And obviously I draw the attention that obviously the Prime Minister has said that we need to build homes. And the next one would be, we're talking about housing waiting lists. Whether it's 5, 6, 7 years, we have a housing waiting list. I have, and I'm sure most people do, they have residents coming onto them saying that they've got offspring sofa sleeping. In this day and age, Chair, it's unacceptable. So there's another reason. And I do go back to the one that I started with, the Greenbelt issue. This is a site, it's not an SSI, it's not a heritage site, it's not a national park, doesn't pose a flood risk, it's not adjacent to historic towns. And this is a small area of land that can have a big impact in terms of social and economic gains. We do know there are many sites, unfortunately, bearing the title of Greenbelt that do not live up to their name, and this is one of them. So, you know, that's some of those reasons. And then I would also add an appeal decision that the Secretary of State that has given recently through the Planning Inspectorate. Its appeal reference APP/M150/20-3246788. It's land at London Road, west of Rhondda Road, North Thundersley, Benfleet, Essex. And this is one of the most up-to-date decisions that went in favour for an applicant on the 21st of July this year. And this is a case that was brought against Castle Point. So there's another reason why we need to be doing this. So I do hope that those are sufficient reasons that we can now proceed to a vote.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor, I was just going through some of the comments here. What was the comments about? Did you say homelessness? What was one of the reasons?
Homelessness? We do have, whether it's a 5 or a 6 year or a 7 year term of housing waiting list, we do have a housing waiting list where we do have a need for homes. So, you know, there's an implied usage that we need those social homes. And of course, you know, we're in this predicament because the government of the day have decided not to build 1 million council homes to provide for these situations. So we're left as local councils to grab the 35% of every application that comes along, Chair. And also, Chair, another reason, this area has good bus services, good road networks and cycleways, and has a lot of surrounding parks nearby. Now, when I'm talking about surrounding parks, I'm talking about the Heath Park, which is less than half a mile away. And if you go the other way, we have Blackshots Park, which is a huge park, Chair, which you would know, and that's less than 3/4 of a mile away. So there are parks, there are local facilities. This is what I'm driving at.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rice, and I can see Councillor Burns got his hand up, so I'll bring him in. Sorry, Councillor Rice, just before, obviously, we go any further, before you get to the officers, obviously, before, when we started the meeting, what we done was we obviously read the report from the member of the Queen's Council advice, and that was obviously to come back and come up with, I think, respectively, more reasons or stronger reasons to approve this. That's what we voted to do. And through your statement there, apart from the Benfleet appeal decision, which I have very limited knowledge of, I personally don't think you're bringing anything else to the party other than what the QC has already slammed down as simply inadequate reasons to develop on Greenbelt. You raise the issue of homelessness. I mean, come on, what has homelessness got to do with this development? A homeless person is not going to be able to afford an affordable home. This is not social housing. So when we're coming up with these reasons, it's like the Wild West. We can't just fire reasons off. We need to come up with core reasons for approval. So what I'm looking for personally, and I'm sure the QC will back me up, or maybe Ian, I don't know, maybe they'll back you up. I'm looking for reasons why we're developing on the Greenbelt that are substantive based on what we've already read from the report from the QC. Councillor Rice?
Yes. Well, what I have said, Chair, and we can't escape it, Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply of homes, of housing. We don't have a 20% buffer. Year by year, we are a failing authority because we are not meeting our government housing targets. So we haven't, and then what the most important thing, Chair, is we have a local plan to some extent. We have a core strategy. We don't have a call for sites. We won't have a call for sites. It might be 24, it might be 25, it might be 23. We don't know. We're in a fast-changing world with COVID-19. And also, we must obviously take due reference to our Prime Minister, who tells us to build homes for local people. And this is only a few miles away, Chair, from a growth area, which is the Port of Tilbury. But it's not just the Port of Tilbury, it's the Amazon warehouse, all those warehouses all around there. People need homes. And of course, you know, these are the reasons why we need them. We talk about the creation of employment. That is very valid. When you're building 79 homes, you need local people, Chair. So I would hope that that does answer the questions you've posed, because it is a very important subject that we do get these homes, and affordable homes can be for key workers, Chair. You know, they can be for teachers, local doctors, social workers, fire officers. These are people that struggle to buy homes, Chair. And if we don't have them, our whole social infrastructure will fall down, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rice. Yeah, again, I mean, in terms of us not reaching our obligations on housing, I don't think that's fair in the sense of most councils struggle to do that. So to say here in Thurrock we've got a concrete over all of our Greenbelt outside the local plan, I'm not sure is valid. But again, that may either be backed up or quashed down. Now, you've obviously come up with your reasons. I'm going to go over to Lena Nicholson. Are you there?
Thank you, Chair. I think Michael Bedford would like to step in at this moment first, Chair. Thank you.
Michael, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't in a sense mind when I speak, but I think the important thing that has to be kept in mind is that if a decision is to be made to approve inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, that can only be done by properly applying the tests in national policy, which are also reflected in your own core strategy. Now, at the moment, without in any way wanting to sort of enter into the debate in terms of the merits, because that's not really my role, I have to say to you that the debate has not engaged with the tests in national policy. And to an extent, some of the comments have been, as it were, directly contrary to national policy, because the starting point, which you are required to do, and you don't have a choice about it in terms of following the policy, you are required to give substantial weight to the harm that is caused to the Greenbelt and to any other harm that you find exists with the proposal. That's not, as it were, optional. If you don't do that, you will be disregarding national policy, and your decision would be very much susceptible to challenge. So, and it's not just a case of giving weight to the Greenbelt, you are required to give substantial weight to the harm to the Greenbelt and to any other harm. And it's only once you've done that, and genuinely and conscientiously done that, that you can then begin to assess how much weight you might give to things that are truly benefits of a proposal or positive factors in favour of a proposal. And then again, you genuinely and conscientiously have to undertake that balancing exercise with the substantial weight to the harm on one side, and that's, as it were, set out by national policy, and then whatever weight you are giving to the positive factors on the other side. And it's only if you conclude that the positives clearly outweigh the harm that you're actually able to make a positive decision to grant a permission on the basis of very special circumstances. Now, at the moment, the list of 9 positive factors, and I won't go through them at the moment one by one, but that's just not good enough as a way of making the decision. You can't just add up positives. You need to carry out a proper balancing exercise, and I haven't at the moment heard in the way that the matter has been put that has been engaged with, and that sets yourselves up for a problem in terms of the lawfulness of your decision. Now, in relation to the factors, most of those factors have been addressed already in the officer report, and I don't really think it's sort of particularly appropriate for me to go through those matters. I would say in relation to the appeal decision at Castle Point, that one thing which shines out about Greenbelt cases is that the test of very special circumstances is inevitably site-specific and case-specific. And it's for that reason why a Greenbelt case which is approved doesn't set a precedent and you can't point to a case elsewhere and say, well, because that case was permitted, so this case should be permitted. You're not able to do that. What you have to do is you have to find that the very special circumstances test is satisfied in the particular case you're dealing with. And so whatever may be the circumstances in the Castle Point case, and I don't know the detail, but it's simply not going to help you in addressing the proper balance in this case. I think, I say, most of the other matters were already rehearsed, and I say it would be sensible for you to consider those questions in the officer report, which do remind you about how to approach benefits and how much weight to give to benefits. And I say, I come back to the point, you absolutely need to carry out that proper balancing exercise to make a lawful decision.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Byrne and Councillor Rice if you wanted to come back on Michael there. Thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Yes, thank you. Just listening to what Councillor Rice said about the Prime Minister said we need to build homes. He's also said he's happy for everybody in performing arts to be homeless. So that counteracts that one. Cycleways, we've lost £500,000 in funding because Thurrock have got it totally wrong. So that screwed that one up, Councillor Rice. Thurrock 2, there are no jobs. Absolutely no jobs are on offer at Tilbury 2. They're all agency and they're not contracted. So there are no jobs. So you can't sell planning on jobs. It's about planning. And the most important thing, it's the law. Listen to the people that know. Listen to them. Stop brinkmanship. Stop blowing your own trumpet. Listen to the law. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Well, if I could come back, Chair, after that bit of an outburst. We could put in the site being self-contained physically by highway and existing development is naturally constrained. So it will therefore neither create unrestricted sprawl nor merge towns nor cause encroachment other than the development of the site itself, contrary to what the officers have outlined on sprawl and encroachment. The wider countryside will be undisturbed. There are no historic town issues, and the land isn't derelict, although it already nestles between developed urban land. And I also note the concessions in the latter report, dated the 16th of July 20, in paragraphs 3.14 and 3.15, where the officers accept the impact on the Greenbelt in terms of sprawl and the quality of land are matters of judgment, and therefore the matters for the members to judge too. So there is another reason why we can depart from this policy, and along with the ones that I have outlined, I would say, Chair, we would be content to go to a vote, and then it's up to the Secretary of State to make a decision whether he wants this site or not wants it, because ultimately it is his choice. Because this is outside of, it's a departure from our Greenbelt plan, we would have to send it up to the Secretary of State for his decision. And that's where we rest our case, Chair. And I hope that is now enough that we can proceed to a vote. And if it is one, then we can actually proceed to this going up finally after 5 months to the Secretary of State for his final judgment. And I think that's very important. I think we've held this up long enough. You know, the applicant must be aghast at the way we treat people. It's terrible.
Okay, thank you for your comments there, Councillor Rice. I noticed Councillor Shinnick's hand's been up, so I'll come to you next, Councillor Shinnick. Just before I go there, so what Michael said before you came in there, Councillor Rice, was that the reasons that you had come up with were not good enough to clear the very special circumstances. So obviously you've added something there, so we will review that. I think ultimately, look, one thing I would say is, as chairman of the committee, I think I've always been quite balanced. And I think my own personal opinion is sometimes on planning, you've just got to accept the result. So when Woodview went ahead, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago now, I didn't like it. I didn't vote for it. I thought it was a bad one. You would have picked up my comments in the press, but I accepted it. I accepted, and I passed it through to the monitoring officer. Now, the fact that this has come back has got nothing to do with any of the planning committee members other than the fact that we didn't meet that very special circumstance. What I'm trying to say there is sometimes on planning, you've just got to accept whether you're right, whether you're wrong, whether you can or whether you can't. And at the moment, you've got to clear this hurdle, and you're not doing it. So I know you want it to go ahead. I know you're very passionate about it. It doesn't make anyone good or bad. But in order to get this approved, in order to get what you want, you've got to come up with very special circumstance. And you're not. And I know you're not, because we've got a member of the Queen's Council here telling us you are nowhere near clearing that hurdle. So you've got to clear it. You can't just say, let's go to the vote. In order to get to that situation, you need to satisfy the monitoring officer and the member of the Queen's Council, who, with the greatest of respect, know more than us when it comes to the law and planning. So let's continue. But as I said, I think it's a time where we've got to accept that maybe we don't always get what we want. Councillor Shinnick.
Yeah, I just a little bit disappointed of what I've been hearing from fellow councillors tonight, because we're all elected members and we've all got our own point of view. And, you shouldn't be downing one another. And we ought to go forth, as Gerard said, with the vote.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there, Councillor Shinnick, and I'm not against anything you just said there. What I'm saying to Councillor Rice is he needs to come up with better reasons to approve the application. He can't do it if he doesn't come up with substantial reasons. And at the moment, he's not doing that. So we're sort of going around in circles. I'm not shooting him down. I'm not going against you. It is what it is. Planning's difficult, but we've got to a point where we have to protect ourselves from a legal challenge. And we know that the council is not unreasonable because they approved Langdon Hills. We came up with good reasons. The borough needed a new care home. It was right next to a new establishment. We come up with plenty of reasons why that was a good project. This here is simply homes in the Greenbelt. It's not enough to clear that hurdle. Councillor Byrne and Councillor Lawrence, and then Councillor Byrne. I see you got your hand up.
I think Councillor Byrne needs to go first. He had his hand up quite a while before me.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Byrne.
Is it as easy as Gerard says, whether it's just whether the Secretary of State clicks his fingers or he don't? Just seems to be just like, I'm going to click my fingers and they can have it, or I'm not going to click my fingers. It seems so simple. We're so far up in that office that it depends on a click of fingers. So can you, some expert somewhere, tell me whether that is just like fairy tale land or it really actually happens?
Councillor Byrne, so yeah, strictly speaking, the rules are that it does go through to the Secretary of State, but being realistic, he's looking at probably hundreds, thousands of applications potentially a week. So it can get picked up, it normally does not. But that's not to say that it's not open to a legal challenge. Councillor Lawrence.
How I decided on my vote really is like what the solicitor said earlier. You have to balance while we're giving away Greenbelt and what is the benefits of it. So to me, I do think that the benefits of it are that this area is growing at such a rapid speed. We've got so many companies and businesses, everything is growing so fast, and we just haven't got the capability to house people that want to work in this area. At the moment, we've got people being bussed into Amazon to the workplace every day. And also, I think further down the line, we're going to have Thames Enterprise. That's going to be Thames Enterprise Park. That's going to be going on ahead. We've got DP World expanding all the time. So I'm thinking that is on one side of balancing this small area which isn't encroaching on any area next to it. It can't encroach, it can't join on to anywhere. So that makes this a special piece of land which is going to be left because it's obvious that the applicant no longer wants to keep it the way it is. And the special circumstances is that, all right, it's only 35%, but we're getting offered this now, whereas further down the line, we might not get that, and it's still going to be gone. So I think that's a special circumstance as well. So with the growing of the area and the work and everything coming in, I do think that should be took into consideration to balance this small area of land, which, let's face it, has been neglected. The office has done fantastic pictures putting this up. I know the area well. I can tell you now, it doesn't look like that piece of ground when you drive past it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So obviously you've added to the reasons for approval. I think in terms of the expansion, I mean, Tilbury 2, my brother works there. I mean, that is open, that is working. Amazon's been open for some time now. I know we're using them as reasons for potential for more employment, but at the end of the day, these companies are already up and running. And I think ultimately what we've also got to get over is, why does this particular development represent a better answer to the long-term housing supply that we have, that's arranged, that's coming through the system, i.e. more acceptable sites. So the arguments are good, but there's also counter arguments. What we're looking for is silver bullets that stop us getting a legal challenge. Councillor Burns, do you want to come in afterwards? Oh, sorry. Also, before we go any further, I've noticed that it's 21 minutes past. 21 minutes past 8. Obviously, we're coming up to 2.5 hours, so I'd like to suspend standing orders, and so we get to the end of this meeting. I assume that's approved. Yeah, agreed. Fantastic. Right. I think everyone said what they've said.
Councillor Fletcher wants a word.
Oh, Councillor Fletcher, thank you.
Me chair. The concern I've got, I mean, I think we seem to have got to a stage where we're not, and I think rightly, we're not talking about whether or not the councillors should have made the decision they've made. Decision's been made, end of. But I do kind of feel that it's maybe, and Councillor Rice is probably better placed to sort of to say whether I'm right or wrong, but it seems a little bit like it's a bit of a difficult ask to ask the councillors who are in favour of this to come up with watertight reasons that will pass the tests, kind of off the top of their heads during the meeting. I don't know, Councillor Rice, do you feel like you need time to do that? It just feels like it's kind of a, given that, to be fair, the officers will have had plenty of time to put their reasons together and used it well, I think. We're kind of asking Councillor Rice, Councillor Lawrence to more or less come up with the hidden silver bullet out of their back pockets, and it just feels like that's not particularly fair.
Yes. Councillor Fletcher, I'm reading Kevin Lee's proposition to the authority, where he's a barrister and a mediator, and he's a head of property planning and environment. Kevin has been a barrister for the council and against the council. Now, Kevin quite rightly says here, I appreciate that the effect on the green belt is the driver behind the officers concerned. In this regard, it is important to recognise that none of the 5 purposes of the green belt would be undermined by the development. He then goes on to talk about paragraphs 7.13 on page 69 of the 25th of June report. He then says, this is something that can constitute a very special circumstance in itself, namely the green belt purposes are not actually harmed. The site being self-contained physically by highway and existing development is naturally constrained. It therefore will neither create unrestricted sprawl, nor merge towns, nor cause encroachment other than the development of the site itself, contrary to what the officer's opinion on sprawl and encroachment. The wider countryside will be undisturbed. There are no historic town issues, and the land is derelict, although it already nestles between developed urban area. I also note the concessions in the later report, dated the 16th of July 20, in paragraphs 3.14 and 3.15, where the officers accept the impact on the green belt in terms of sprawl and the quality of land are matters of judgment, and therefore matters for the members to judge too. Now, in that paragraph, I would say to you, Chair, and to Michael and to Ian, that that is weight enough, along with all the other reasons I put up, for the departure, because that would satisfy a legal opinion, because this has come from, as I say, Kevin Lee, a highly sought-after barrister, qualified in planning, and these are his reasons. So I think we pick that paragraph out and we put that into our recommendation. And that should suffice, along with our other conditions we've put in, such as, Chair, Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply of housing, nor a 20% buffer, and we have no local plan actually within sight. It could be 23, 24, 25, we don't know. How long's a piece of string? What we do know, there are no call for sites at this time. That's why we're judging these. And whether we like it or not, economically, you're within 2 miles of a growth zone. And what does the government say? You build homes near a growth zone so people can walk and ride bikes to their employment. So this will be a major contribution for local people in terms of affordable housing and education of 600,000. And of course, we mustn't forget the healthcare of nearly £30,000. And what I've said also, this area already has good bus services, good road networks, cycle paths, and lots of surrounding parks nearby. So these are the reasons, along with Kevin's actual paragraph. If you want me to read it again, I will do, Chair, so that it can be noted, so that we can move on to the vote, because these are the reasons for the departure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Rice, for those reasons. What I'll do, I know Ian's had his hand up for a while, so I'll go to Ian. Just before we do, again, without putting too much fly in the ointment there, you say that this site is within 2 miles of a growth zone. Well, that's the whole of South Thurrock. That doesn't mean that we should concrete over every parcel of the Greenbelt. You raised Kevin Lee. And obviously you've hit home the point on the Greenbelt. I've not heard anything for the reason for refusal for the acoustic fencing. Obviously, the World Health Organisation are saying that is not an ideal site. It says that the impact on the noise will ensure that the quality of the amenity spaces are not degraded, and it will also result in an overbearing dominant impact on a harmful visual amenity. So again, you've got to come over that hurdle. I've not heard anything. Cheers. What does Kevin Lee say?
Is that you have to understand is that because this is an outline application, all matters are reserved, and the acoustic fencing is a reserved matter as well. So we have to overcome the Greenbelt issue, which Kevin Lee's paragraph here, which I'll read out again for you if you so wish, has overcome that, along with the reasons I've actually specified. And it's my belief now, Chair, that you do put it to the vote. We have got a legal recommendation now, and it's quite clear that we need a vote. It needs to then go to Ian, to go across to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State will decide, because we can't physically decide amongst ourselves this evening, but thank goodness that along with our Michael giving us his legal opinion, also the applicant got Kevin Lee to write this in as well, which we were emailed it this afternoon. And there is a whole paragraph that underlines why we can depart from the Green Belt policy, Chair. It's quite simple, Chair. We move to a vote.
Well, I'm not so sure it is that simple. You've raised a barrister. This evening we've got a QC, and we've used QC advice over recent months to approve applications such as Langdon Hill, such as Little Thurrock Marshes. So we should really take on board what Michael's saying, and he'll pick up on what Mr. Lee said. Ian Hunt, you had your hand up for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to flag, whilst I appreciate the work Councillor Rice is doing to formulate a set of recommendations, the key test, and I acknowledge that we've edged towards it with the inclusion of this latest set of comments. The key test that members need to do is set out in the report, essentially page 49, paragraph 343, so 3.43. So this is the key test that members have to assess. It's not a case of, do members have reasons for doing this? Because this is Greenbelt, members have to have their reasons, give them appropriate weight for what they consider to be the positives, but before they can sort of say these positives are adequate, there has to start with the substantial weight of harm to the green belt, which is by definition what it is, and that's also picked up in Kevin Lee's note, although obviously he's come from a specific direction, so he has built from that. And then you have to turn around and explain that you consider that those benefits that you've identified countervail the specific harm, and at that point you're only then able to move on to conclude that very special circumstances exist. Chair, if I may, through you, I'd quite like to invite Michael to just comment firstly on some of the specifics of the resolution as it sits at the moment, and that point around Greenbelt harm, but also just to pick up the point Councillor Byrne was raising regarding calling to the Secretary of State.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And once you've spoke, Michael, I'll go to Councillor Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll deal with the second point first, if I can, just in terms of the Secretary of State's role. The Secretary of State is not there to, as it were, be a safety net to ensure the legality or the lawfulness of decisions. The Secretary of State won't, as it were, get involved in a decision simply because somebody says, well, this might be unlawful. That's what judicial review is there for, and that's the court's job. And obviously, we as lawyers try to advise our clients, and particularly our local authority clients, how to make decisions which don't end up in a judicial review. But I say the Secretary of State has a different function. He has an overall interest in the operation of the planning system, and he does have a power to intervene, as you say, through calling in decisions either because they're brought to his attention or they're referred to him. But his tests for doing so are not based on the lawfulness of the decision. They're based more on policy matters and whether he thinks that the issues of a particular case, generally speaking, cover issues of more than local importance. And if they don't, then he's very unlikely to intervene. So it certainly would be not appropriate to approach this decision on the basis, in a sense, well, we've got the ability to make a decision, and if we get it wrong, the Secretary of State will row us out, because that's not what will happen, and that's not his job or his function. You have to make the decision you think is right. You also have to make a decision that is lawful, and really what Ian Hunt has been trying to do is to direct you specifically in the officer report to that paragraph 343, which does tell you what you need to look at and articulate in any reasons to show that you have actually applied the test that's set out in national policy and in your local policy. And you really do have to recognise that even if you think a particular piece of greenbelt doesn't contribute much to greenbelt purposes, because it has been designated as greenbelt in an adopted development plan, you still have to give it substantial weight in terms of the harm that is caused to the greenbelt by allowing inappropriate development on it. Now, you have to have that there in your balance, that substantial harm, and you have to show explicitly that you have got that there in your balance, and then you can go on to look at the other factors and give them the weight that in your planning judgment they properly deserve, and then you have to do that conscientious balancing. And that's where you need to get yourselves to, and that's certainly what, in terms of expressing a decision, you would need to express in that decision to get over, I say, that legal requirement that you have to show that you've applied the policy in order to make a lawful decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne?
Yes. Gerald just said we haven't got a 5-year plan, which is right, but maybe this highlights the fact that we need a 5-year greenbelt plan. So we know where we are with the law and everything else. So it's we have no plan, but we have a greenbelt plan. So maybe we need to educate all of us lot what the actual greenbelt plan is.
I mean, I could, Chair, read out part of this decision, paragraph 34. It says here, in the context of an out-of-date plan, which Thurrock clearly does have, where some sacrifice of the greenbelt is unavoidable in order to provide enough homes in the borough, this scheme provides substantial social benefits relative to its size by the contribution made to the housing need. That in itself will cover a further aspect to what we've been debating tonight. So that, along with the previous paragraph I've read out, these are reasons for us to depart from the Greenbelt policy. And then we can start to say that Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply of housing, nor a 20% buffer. We could give that as substantial weight. And because we don't have a viable local plan, and when I say that, I'm being very polite, that we don't fall for sites, Chair. So we could give that substantial weight. And economically, this is identified within 2 miles of a growth zone, Chair, which we do need houses. And whether people like it or not, the government of the day have said it's far better for people to walk to work and cycle to work. So that's a major contribution. And then we talk about affordable homes, another contribution. We're talking about a full education grant of 600,000. We're talking about the local amenity services. So I think tonight we have put forward the reasons. Now it's up to you to seek a vote so that we can proceed, Chair. I mean, if you so wish, I'll apply even more tests that you might need out of these documents I've received this afternoon. You must tell me, Chair, you know, because I think we're coming to the stage where, you know, we've got the arguments, we need to proceed to vote, and whether officers do like it or not, we need to say that if it is passed, it goes to the Secretary of State. He'll decide whether it's yes or no. That's the end of it. And all we're arguing here about is whether we've got the reasons. Well, I would submit, Chair, that now that I've given you those reasons, we have got them. and we need to proceed to a vote, Chair. Because otherwise, all we'll do all night, Chair, is we go round and round in circles, you know. But it's up to you, Chair, you know.
Yeah, I accept that. Obviously, we have been discussing this now for 2 hours, 40 minutes. I think you will have obviously heard my opinion that I think that you need to meet those particular tests, and those tests have not been met, in my opinion. You are of the opinion that actually there is ground for approval, and obviously planning is all about opinions, but then we are also subject to the rules. And my own personal opinion is I don't think as much as we like applications, we dislike them, we vote for them, we vote against them. I think sometimes we have to accept that we get the power to overrule the officers. But I must admit, I do think you need ammunition. So you are right. I think we've battered this one to death now for quite some time. I don't think anything's going to change. My opinion, your opinion. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to, I can see Councillor Burns with his hand up, and then I'll go to the officers and we'll see if we can come to some form of conclusion. Okay, Councillor Byrne, and then I'll bring in Ian. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask Councillor Rice, does this apply to all of Thurrock, including Chadwell St Mary?
We take every application on its merits, Chair.
Yes, we do. Okay then. So what I'll do is I'll bring in Ian. Actually, Steve, was your hand up, Steve? Steve Taylor, thank you.
Yes, it was, Chair. Sorry, just really briefly. Just listening to what's been put forward there, and I won't dwell on this forever, but there's two things that spring to mind. The first thing is that when you put things forward, they have to be material and evidence based. We kind of keep avoiding that. So all of the reasons that were put forward, it could be any site that you could justify the same way. You could pick any of the sites that are already within the development plan, and you'd achieve exactly the same end. So there's nothing unique that this site allows that nowhere else would. And I know you've made that point before, but I think when I listen to what's being put forward, I don't see anything unique about it. And the next point I'd make, I think several times both Ian and Michael have kind of pointed at this is the way you need to deal with this to get beyond it. And at the moment, I think that's falling on deaf ears, because I haven't seen anybody going in that direction to do exactly what for at least twice, if not 3 or 4 times, has been suggested is a way forward. But far be it from me. Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Chair.
You're on mute, Chair.
Right. Okay, thank you. Ian Hunt, and then Councillor Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In an attempt to aid councillors and to move this forward, there is a key test here that we need in order to counterbalance, because I understand and have heard Councillor Rice putting forward a substantial number of points which he says are positive. Can he please confirm that he is acknowledging the policy test which says that there is acknowledge the specific harm and substantial harm test that has to be considered with regard to Greenbelt, and then confirm that he is balancing and considering that against the other factors, but that substantial harm test is at the forefront and a key part of the decision making that he is taking. I don't know if Michael wishes to add any more to that, if I may, Chair, through you.
Yep, go ahead, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I would echo that. That is the key point, which really does need to be faced in any reasons that are given for a positive decision. There needs to be recognition expressly that the proposal would cause substantial harm to the Greenbelt, and that is being weighed and given substantial weight in the balance before you get onto the positives. And then obviously, I say, if you acknowledge that, there may be a way that you can make a decision, but you do need to acknowledge that. And I say, the point has been raised more than once. If you look at paragraph 343 on page 49 of the report, it tells you that, but you do need to articulate that you have actually acknowledged that you're giving substantial weight to the harm to the greenbelt.
Okay, Councillor Rice, did you hear that?
Yes, I did, and I would just repeat that paragraph that I read out earlier. We do understand that, and we must understand that is a reason to actually depart from the policy by recognising that yes, there is harm, but because there are these natural constraints, these are the reasons why we can depart. And if I have to read it out again for the benefit of Michael and Ian and the clerk, I will, it's not a problem. But it is quite clear in Kevin Lee's advice. He says, and I'll just repeat, I appreciate the effect on the greenbelt is the driver behind the officer's concern. In this regard, it is important to recognise that none of the 5 purposes of the greenbelt would be undermined by the development. These are set out in paragraph 7.13 of the report dated the 25th of June 20. So he's referring to the report that we had first of all. He then goes on to say there's also something that can constitute a very special circumstance in itself, namely that greenbelt purposes are not actually harmed. The site being self-contained physically by highway and existing development is a natural constraint, is therefore will neither create unrestricted sprawl nor merge towns nor cause encroachment other than the development of the site, contrary to what the officer's opinion on sprawl and encroachment. The wider countryside will be undisturbed. There are no historic issues. The land isn't derelict, although it already nestles between developed urban land. And it says, I also note the concessions in the latter report, dated the 16th of July 20, in paragraphs 3.14 and 3.15, where the officers accept the impact on the greenbelt in terms of sprawl and the quality of the land are matters of judgment. And therefore, these matters are for members to judge too. So we're saying, though, that's our reason for departing. The reason for departing, Michael, is quite clear, that this site is covered on 3 sides. It has highways, existing development is a natural constraint, so it wouldn't be urban sprawl. And he's quite specific about that paragraph. Now that, along with the list I've already gone through, the fact that Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply, and whether you like it or not, Michael, 5-year supply is very important. But when this goes to the Secretary of State, he'll look at this and say, well, they haven't got a 5-year supply, they haven't got a 20% buffer, they haven't got a call for sites, their emerging plan is due in 23-24, and he'll say, quite obviously there's a need for homes, so let it go. And, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I can keep going through these, Michael, but there must come a time when you accept Kevin Lee's opinion and we move forward, because that paragraph constitutes the reason for the departure for the very special circumstances. And that is clear as mud to me. I don't know what else I have to do. That is there in black and white, Michael,
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rice. Well, I think Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Salmons have their hands up, so I'll go to them shortly. I mean, I think one of the hurdles I'm struggling with, Councillor Rice, is you raise the site, it's surrounded by three roads, its location is perfect, but the site is the reason for refusal. The site is actually...
Sorry, Chair, you're cutting off a bit. You want to mute your mic and then unmute it again to try? Are you still there, Chair? Okay. Everyone, if we could just give the Chair a minute, please. He's just going to leave and then rejoin. Chair, your audio's still pretty... Okay, he's gone. Just give him a minute to come back.
What is going on here?
Chair, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Chair.
Excellent. Sorry, just while I sort this out, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Salmons, and then I'll go back to Michael. I know he had his hand up. Just before going, Gerard, I was just saying that obviously you're raising the site as a benefit, but when you look through the reasons, the site is actually the downfall of what's causing the problem. Lawrence, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry.
Looking at 3.43, like we're supposed to be doing here, and the main reason why I think it outweighs losing the green belt is the actual position of this piece of land. And now this is the main reason why I fought for this area as well, right from the beginning. Not that I want to build on Greenbelt, but this is an ideal location to help Palmer's College, which has now had to join with Civic because it's had past troubles, which we both know. Now, when I first became a councillor, I was Shadow of Education and I went round and visited all the schools. They can train up their own teachers, but they can't keep them. There's a shortage of teachers in this area, and Palmer's did struggle for a while. Now, it wouldn't surprise me later on if Palmer's and Civic decided that they want to start building on their school grounds just to put in provisions for homes for teachers to entice them to stay there at their college and school, because at the moment they just can't keep them. So I think this is an ideal opportunity to help the college right opposite. We're a better place for the teachers to want to live. And if they've got families, they can live here too. And with the 600,000, we know that we can support them with their children's education. So I think this is my proposal for it. And hopefully that the officers, with the pre-planning what goes ahead, perhaps they could make that part of the planning application approval for it to be to key workers, to give them the first opportunity to have one of these homes, what will be available for them and affordable.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Yeah, very valid opinion. I mean, my own personal opinion would, when you look at mental health, open space, I would have thought it would have been better for the youngsters to not be in a school that's in an overdeveloped area, which this area is becoming overdeveloped. Again, I'll raise the Friends of the Earth email I got this week that said that Grays is a no-go zone for open space areas. So it definitely, in my opinion, would be a benefit for the students to have clear open air and not overdevelopment. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. One of my reasons for looking at this site, and I'm also not in favour of plastering over all our green belt, is that, as Councillor Rice and Councillor Lawrence have both pointed out, this is quite a small block of land, and with it you can walk into Chadwell, you can walk to Grays, and for that reason it is quite an accessible piece of land. I think our big issue tonight that we've now spent nearly 3 hours debating is because what us councillors, the ones that are in favour of this development, what we see as very special circumstances isn't necessarily what the officers see. And people's opinions, quite rightly so, are different. So it is very, I can understand where the legal people are coming from, because they're saying this is the legal way to go. But we also think that we have special circumstances. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, well, strictly speaking, according to the QC advice, we're not there yet with the special circumstances. My opinion is when we look at Greenbelt applications, if you are going to effectively ride roughshod over the Greenbelt, you can't pick and choose where that is and where that isn't acceptable. What I mean is, if you're approving Greenbelt here, you're exposing areas that you may live in. Now, I don't know where everyone specifically lives, but as councillors, you can't turn around to your residents and say, I will defend the Greenbelt, and then just pick and choose a piece of Greenbelt and say that's acceptable. If you want to protect the Greenbelt in, I don't know, Stanford, if you want to protect the Greenbelt in Tilbury, if you want to protect the Greenbelt in East Tilbury, you have to set a precedent, and that precedent is no development in the Greenbelt. You vote for this, you're signing away Greenbelt in your own wards, and well, that's facts, and maybe the QC can back me up on that. Where are we now? Ian, did you want to come in here? Are we any further along? Thank you.
Chair, Michael has got his hand up and I think is in a better position to make a couple of comments regarding some of those key elements.
Yeah, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I mean, it seems to me that, as it clearly, and I certainly don't want it to be thought that, I say, it's my job to be involved in the merits of the decision, because it isn't. It's my job to help you on the lawfulness of the decision, and the position of the, as I understand it from the Councillor Rice's comments, and to an extent echoed by Councillor Lawrence's comments, is there is an acceptance that there is harm to the Greenbelt. What is needed is an acceptance that when you're doing the balancing, you have given substantial weight to that harm before you have then put that against the benefits that you have identified, and that it is your conscientious assessment that those positive factors clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm. If you're able to confirm essentially that's the way that you have approached this decision, then in terms of simply the legal tests, you would have a decision that would satisfy the tests. But you do need to do that rather than, in a sense, avoid it by simply talking about why you don't think this particular piece of Greenbelt is of particular value.
Well, I think Michael's very right what he does say, and of course we must recognise there is harm to the Greenbelt, But what we're saying, Michael, is that in recognising that harm, we recognise that this particular piece of land is physically hemmed in by the highway and existing development. So it's naturally constrained. It cannot be urban sprawl. There aren't those type of problems. And in doing that also, you know, we are still talking about, we're right next to a growth zone, which is 2 miles away. It's very important. We're also talking about the increase of prosperity and employment growth in Thurrock. You know, that is in itself important. The balance between housing and jobs growth across the borough. You know, we need to support that, because if we're having all these jobs in DP World, the Port of Tilbury, Amazon and everywhere else, we need to have that housing. There's one thing for sure, if we go to DP World, they haven't got enough housing. They're coming down to the middle so that they can actually buy housing. So there is a demand for this. This isn't something we've just magicked out of the, you know, out of a looking glass. And of course, we have to go back, Michael, to the fact that Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply. That's a fundamental thing. Nor does it have a 20% buffer plan, nor, and this is very important, it doesn't have a viable new local plan with a call for sites. It might have a core strategy, but there are no call for sites. So that's why we're having to adjudge these site by site. And when we're talking about, you know, local housing, we are talking about 26 units for people such as key workers. Now, that's got to be another reason why we can depart. And then we talk about, you know, the scheme is making good use of a viable piece of land. So we're coming to the, you know, the actual benefit. And then, of course, we've got to understand that there is good infrastructure there. It's got a good bus service. It's got good road networks, cycle paths, and there's lots of surrounding parks nearby. So it's a sustainable. And so that we've actually got those arguments. So I would hope that we've now come to a conclusion where we can go to a vote, because we have recognised, obviously, that, you know, there is harm, but in recognising that harm, we realise that the site is self-contained, so that once the site's been developed, there is no more harm. You know, I don't know what else to say. I mean, you know, surely a delivery of affordable housing units is vital in a borough to actually get people in to be employed. It reduces reliance on commuting into the borough. The site is in a sustainable location and positioned nearby by services and facilities. You know, they're facts. You know, we can't run away from it. So I would hope that now we're within striking distance of going to a vote. We have the legal reasons. We have recognised there is harm to the green belt, and we must move on, Chair, I would suggest.
Who runs the meeting?
Sorry, everyone, just give the chair a minute. I think he's dropped out again.
We could have his substitute, the vice chair.
That would be the case if the chair can't connect back on.
Thanks for reminding me.
You look very studious, Michael.
Is that a way of putting it?
Okay, thank you. Sorry there. Councillor Lawrence, you had your hand up, and who else? It was Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Byrne.
I'd just like to make one small point, just to fellow officers and councillors, that my ward is Bellis and it's been built on dramatically, so I do know this sort of thing does happen. But I'd also like to make you aware that Buckles Lane contains hundreds of people what live down there, what rent houses and don't pay council tax because they can't find anywhere to live, and they're all workers. And I know that for a fact, and I've got the proof and I've got the evidence, because I had a business there and they used to come to me, and I know that's where they're living because they can't find anywhere to live locally. So I do know that this does happen. They're living down there in a caravan and it's a dangerous area. So that should be a special circumstance on its own. But we could go on and on and on like this tonight. I'd also like to thank Mr. Ian Hunt, who's been very patient with us, and the QC. And I know you're all doing your best to try and help us, but what it boils down to is that legally, we just can't match you. You're fantastic at doing it. Well done. But in our own hearts, we live here and we know, and I do know that this area would really help the teachers that want to come here and raise families and teach our children and grandchildren.
Okay, Councillor Byrne.
Yes, I think I've lost count where Councillor Rice agrees there is damage to the, or harm to the greenbelt. So I'm a bit confused on that when he agrees, but then we got to build on it. The other thing he just mentioned, like this build and the need for houses on DP World. How many people seriously are going to get on a bike from where that is, from the college in Grays, and bike to DP World? You're having a laugh, Gerard, aren't you? It's never, ever, ever going to happen. You put things forward, but put things forward that can actually will happen.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. Just an observation. We are effectively rehearsing the same arguments we were rehearsing 2 hours ago. I don't think there's been any change or movement. I have to admit, I don't really see much point in going round the houses again, and perhaps a vote is the best way to put this dying animal out of its misery.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you are right. I think everyone said what they wanted to say. I mean, I'm happy to go to the vote, but we also need to be protected legally. So where do we stand? I mean, we've never been in this situation before. We have a situation where members want to continue to go ahead with this, even though it's susceptible to a legal challenge. I personally, and it's all down to opinion, I do not think there is anything else added here this evening other than what we had last time round. Just some more reasons that don't add enough substantial weight to go against the Greenbelt. Whereabouts are we, Ian? I'm happy to go with what you recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members are clearly they've got a set of key reasons that they have for it. I think what I'm going to do, if I may, Chair, is ask Michael to just give a brief synopsis and essentially set a rhetorical question for members, almost requiring, dare I say it, a yes/no answer from Councillor Rice that will hopefully check that where we consider we think members are, and or linking that to the legal test, if we can get that connected, then that will hopefully draw this to a point where we can turn around and say that members have got a decision which will pass that key greenbelt test. So if I can, with your leave, Chair, pass to Michael, that would probably move things forward.
You right there, Michael?
Yes,
Michael,
sorry, I was waiting to be asked because I wasn't sure whether you'd lost your connection again, but yes.
Sorry, Michael. Sorry, just to quickly as well, before you answer that, there was one I had. It was in relation to this acoustic fencing. Obviously, Councillor Rice said that it was reserved matter, but then of course everything's reserved matter. I know there's been a lot of argument against the Greenbelt, but again, if it's against the World Health Organisation's location and the fencing will be necessary, it doesn't matter that it's a reserved item, it's needed. And obviously that's going to impact the noise and it's going to have a harmful effect on the amenity. I've not heard enough of that. So where are you? Because obviously I think we've discussed this long enough now. I think it's either a case of it's acceptable to go to the vote or it's not. But obviously, whatever your opinion is, we'll accept. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Chair, dealing with that point, first of all, obviously, on a kind of sort of point of detail, I think the position is it was the environmental health officer, your own officer's advice that there would need to be an acoustic fence, and he based that advice on guidance issued by the World Health Organization. But I think probably in fairness, it wasn't the World Health Organization themselves making a representation about this development specifically in Thurrock. It was, I say, your own environmental health officer reaching that conclusion on the basis of the advice in general guidance from the World Health Organization about acceptable noise levels, particularly in amenity areas. So that was just a kind of like a detail point. But as to whether that would provide a ground of objection to the proposal, that is very much in the territory of planning judgment for the committee as to how much weight they give to that advice from the environmental health officer, which is obviously endorsed by your professional planning officers, who you may think know rather a lot about how to assess residential amenity impacts. So you've obviously got the benefit of their advice. It's for you to decide whether you accept that or not. Obviously, if you do accept their advice that at the reserve matters stage an acoustic fence will be needed, then you do need to bring into account, even at this stage, any adverse visual impact that would have when you're assessing the harms. So that's simply what I would say about that aspect. In relation to the wider aspect in terms of the Greenbelt policy test, I keep coming back to that paragraph 3.43, but it does require you to do this balancing exercise where you put on one side of the scales the harm to the Greenbelt, and you must give that substantial weight, even for bits of Greenbelt that you might think are scrappy or inconsequential or of no great loss if they were developed. You still have to give substantial weight to the fact that it is harmful to the Greenbelt, which is after all intended to be permanent, for any of it to be lost. So you have to do that. You also have to add to that substantial weight the weight you give to any other harm. And so you put that harm on one side of the scales, and then you can bring into account whatever weight you think is appropriate to the benefits. And then you have to draw the two sides of the scales together, and you can only approve if you're satisfied that the positives clearly outweigh, and that's the test in the policy, clearly outweigh the harm that has been identified. So essentially the rhetorical question, I think, would be that really what you as members need to be in a position to say is that having given substantial weight to the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm that you have identified, and I don't know what your view will be about the acoustic fence, but I say that's a matter that's clearly rehearsed in the report. Having given that, all those harms the weight that they're required, you have then weighed those against the benefits, and it's only if you are satisfied they clearly outweigh the harm that you should then be going to propose an approval.
Chair.
Excellent, thank you. So to clarify, Michael, so, I mean, yeah, look, it comes down to opinion. I mean, I don't think they are. Obviously, other councillors think that they do meet those tests. So, yeah, it is what it is, I think. I think we've said what we've got to say here. I don't think you can't get over that acoustic fencing issue. You're guessing that it won't be an issue. You're guessing that it's not going to affect the visual impact when all evidence suggests it is. So you've not overcome that harm. But again, that's my opinion. I'm not saying that you're wrong. No. I'm just saying that it's not being addressed. That acoustic fencing has not been addressed. You're guessing that it's not going to be a problem, and it is going to be a problem. So I don't think you've met the test, but I appreciate that. That's my opinion, and there's only so much I can do. So, I mean, where are we with that one, Mike?
Chair, before you ask Michael, Michael's heard the debate this evening. We've got Michael here and Ian here for a purpose. Surely now we have told you we're not legal experts. I'm not a qualified lawyer. Surely you've heard the arguments this evening. You can come up with some suggestions for us to depart from the Greenbelt, having heard the arguments, because that's what our officers are supposed to tell us, So really, I think the ball's in your court. You should be telling us now, where is the departure, so that we can come to a decision, and then we can proceed to a vote and put this to bed. Because you can see quite clearly there are sufficient members this evening that want to pass this. So I think it's up to the two of you now to really come up with those reasons for us so that we can move on, if that's fair.
Yeah, Michael, did you have anything to add there?
Well, yeah, I mean, the simple point, if those in favour of an approval could be explicit that they have given substantial weight to the harm to the Greenbelt before they've got on to carrying out the balance, and then they have concluded, having given it that substantial weight, that it is outweighed by the positives, I think that would be a big help. That's really where I'm trying to help you to get to. And that's where I think that's the missing link at the moment. I don't think I can make it much more clear.
Presumably, Michael, if we were to say that we recognise the harm to the Greenbelt and the reasons for our departure is the site being self-contained physically by the highway, well, we need your help to come up with those reasons. We are not legal experts.
No, I'm sorry. What I'm trying to do is, I think I've said the point. Sorry, I said, if you can acknowledge that it's not just that there is harm, but that harm has to carry substantial weight before you get on to your reasons about the positives, then we have got a way forward.
Well, I'm quite happy, Michael, to say that we recognise the harm and give it substantial weight. And we'll give it substantial weight. So that proves that part of the test, right? Yeah. Now we move on to the arguments I put forward, and those must be sufficient to actually meet the test. Because when you look at it, the very fact Thurrock don't have a 5-year supply of housing, no call for sites, no 20% buffer. I mean, when this gets to the Secretary of State, after we've debated it for 3.5 hours, he'll laugh at it. He'll say, "What, Thurrock again? Got no 5-year supply, no housing buffer. Pass it. Get the damn things built." Because we are, whether we like it or not, we are an area of growth. We're amongst growth zones. That's why I said 2 miles away, got the growth zone of Tilbury, the Port of Tilbury. They need homes. We've got Palmer's Sixth Form College right next door. They have great difficulty getting teachers. Why? Because there's no homes. A house goes on the market in Thurrock, it goes off virtually within days. They're facts, you know. I don't know what else we can say, you know.
Well, possibly it would help. Certainly, I think it would help in terms of any resolution. If
Yes.
you could perhaps draw, if you could say specifically that you have considered the test in paragraph 343 in the report.
Yes.
And you have concluded, having applied that test, that it is satisfied and leads you to the conclusion in favour.
Right. Okay. We do that then.
So
we've done that. The clerk's made a note of that. So now, where else do we need to go now?
Well, you then need to make your decision.
Right. So then we need to come up with the reasons for the decision, and the reasons must be: number one, must be that the employment this will generate through construction. 2, Thurrock does not have a 5-year supply of housing, nor a 20% buffer, and year by year failed to meet its government housing targets. Those are factual, Michael. They're not invented, they're factual. So, and then we can say that we're right next to a growth area within 2 miles, which is the Port of Tilbury. And they need homes, along with Palmer's Sixth Form College, that have teachers that are commuting out of this borough to come in to teach. So it would be better if those people had some homes. And then we talk about the other items we put up. And I would hope then we'd be in a position to have a vote. You know, I mean, I can only repeat myself so many times, Michael.
Well, I think you have now articulated that you are giving substantial weight to the harm to the Greenbelt,
yes,
and that you've put that into your balance, and that you're concluding that the positive factors you've identified clearly outweigh that harm and
right,
any other harm.
So now we can go to a vote, Michael.
Well, I think that's probably the chair's role rather than mine.
Okay, we'll tell the chair to go
Yeah.
to a vote, because, you know, we've now got your advice. And thank you very much, Michael, for coming along this evening. You've been an asset.
Excellent. No, thank you very much for that. Yeah, okay, then we've got the information there. Ian, are you happy to proceed?
Thank you, Chair. As Michael said, we now have a resolution which addresses that key test. So if members wish to take that to the vote, I would recommend, though, the planning officer be given an opportunity in the usual way just to make comment.
Okay, thank you. Lee, would you like to come in there?
Thank you, Chair. If we're about to move to the vote, it was just to clarify what steps would then follow from that vote. So the vote, if won and the consent was to be granted, it'd be subject to a number of steps. So first of all, it would be drafting of appropriate planning conditions, and that would suggest would be in conjunction with the chair and myself as assistant director. It would be referred to the Secretary of State, and subject to the application not being called in, then it would be the completion of a Section 106 agreement, and that would be to secure 35% of on-site affordable housing and a financial contribution for healthcare provision, education provision, and to the Essex RAMS. So I just wanted to put that on the record before we move to any vote. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So you've got that information there. You're happy for us to move to vote. Just before we do, I think Councillor Burns got his hand up.
Yes, please. Just so we all know, I assume the clerk's written all this information down. Can she read out back that recommendation which says there is harm to the greenbelt? So can the recommendation that's been put forward by Gerard, can she read that out so we know exactly what we're voting for or not voting for, just to make it 100% clear, please?
Yes, I can do that, but I don't know if officers wanted to do that instead, because normally Lee reads them out, but I can do it if you prefer me to.
Wendy, I've made some notes, so I can read them out if that would help.
Yes, I've made quite a lot of notes, so maybe it's better if you clarify as well.
Okay, so from the notes that I have was there's no 5-year housing supply, 20% buffer, and failing to deliver housing targets, no up-to-date local plan, housing to support local businesses, which is namely the port, being adjacent to a growth area and the college, the provision of affordable housing, the creation of employment through construction, the contribution the development would make towards the council's housing waiting list. The site is scrubland, is self-contained, is naturally contained, and doesn't conflict with reasons to include land within the green belts. There's reference to an appeal decision in Castle Point, though that wasn't particularly expanded upon. That there's lots of surrounding parks to the site, and that's that's all I had in terms of the list. I'm not clear just in terms of what weighting has been given to each of those factors. Chair, that would be my comment to that, but obviously that has been picked up in the wider context and wider debate, I guess.
I would hope, Chair, we give those significant weights because they are significant in nature.
Sorry, if I may interject, Chair, that there is a key element there that, of course, almost comes before that list, and this is just to be really clear for members, that members will have given substantial weight to the harm to the green belt, and that's by definition the fact that it is green belt, and of course any other harms that have been identified within the report. They've given full consideration to the test in 3.43 of the report, and that the list of factors that Lee gave has read out clearly outweigh that harm in members' view, and that they are able to conclude that very special circumstances therefore exist. Apologies for adding that on, but that is the key bit that we've been pushing members for the last while. Thank you, Chair.
Are you there, Chair?
Are you there,
Oh,
Chair?
sorry, thank you. Yeah, no, sorry. Okay, Ian, yeah, thank you. So did you want Councillor Rice to repeat anything, Ian, before we go to the vote, or are you happy for us to go?
Unless Councillor Rice explicitly wants to tell me that, or tell officers that we've got that wrong, I think going to the vote would be the prudent method.
No, I think you've got it right, and thank you very much for your assistance this evening, the two of you. It's been very beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Mike, just before we go to the vote, are you confident that we're protected legally? You don't think we're open to a legal challenge if we go ahead with this? Thank you.
Well, this is being live streamed, so one's always got to be very careful what one says, but I think that we've covered the bases.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne, did you want to say anything before we go to the vote?
Yeah, just one thing. So well done, Ian Hunt. We now have a resolution, so I think we're ready to stick her hands up or down. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay then, Councillor Rice, as you seconded, as you've proposed the motion, do you have a seconder? Did you have a seconder earlier on?
And Councillor Shinnick, second it.
Councillor Shinnick, okay. All right then, so you've got Councillor Rice and Councillor Shinnick. They're in favour of recommendation for approval for the reasons set out. That's application reference 19/1373/OUT. I'll go to Councillor Lawrence. Are you in favour or are you against?
I'm in favour.
Excellent. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Salmons.
Yes, I'm in favour.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne.
You're on mute, Gary.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on the fence with this. I'm 1,000,000% against. Thank you.
Okay, and that takes us to Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so that was 4 votes in favour and 1 against. So that's application 19/01373/OUT has been approved. Lee, are you happy with that?
Chair, I thought Councillor Byrne was against as well. I mean, I know it doesn't make a difference to the result, but let's make sure we're clear.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, 4-3, I said. 4-3, is that correct?
Well, you actually made it 4-1, which made me feel rather lonely.
Yeah, don't give me the vote. I'll get hung.
4-3, Chair, that's it.
Excellent, okay then.
No, we're starting to second reject.
Excellent. All right then. Lee Nicholson, you happy with that process there?
Yeah, so the next steps will be the completion of conditions, and as I said before, it'll be the referral to the Secretary of State, completion of 106 before any decisions issued.
Excellent, wonderful. Okay then, so that's now 32 minutes past 9 in the evening. Obviously a very eventful, very fun debate we had there. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for your attendance this evening, especially our non-co-opted members, Steve Taylor, Ian Hunt, fantastic, thank you, and Michael, thank you so much for your opinions and views. They were very welcome. And to everyone else, have a good evening, and we'll see you next week. We've got a large agenda, so yeah, we'll do it all again. Thank you.
Jolly good.
Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful,
Thanks, everybody.
Well done, everyone.
Well done.
Well done,
Thanks,
everyone.
Chair.
At least
Yeah.
well done, everyone. At least everyone's consistent, so I'm happy. I'm not happy with the vote, but I'm happy with everybody voted as they did before. So we are consistent.